Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly.
And I'm King Newbie, Matt Freeman, right here and now.
This week on the show, the Talisman continues as we chat about chapters 25 through 29 of the novel. Jack finally escapes from the Sunlight home, but at a price. The price, right, of course, is his good friend, Wolfe, who dies tragically.
The noble Wolfe, the dear, dear Wolfe.
Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm really mad at you for making me read this book that made me sad. Seriously, though, it's extremely intense, very sad. We'll talk about the sadness, how well the sadness works, how great a character Wolfe is, how everything was orchestrated. There's actually a lot of interesting stuff to talk about this week. Not just related to Wolfe's death specifically, but like how everything is situated regarding this massacre. And I think there's also going to be some interesting stuff to talk about toward the end when we get to Jack visiting his friend Richard Sloat.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's this is one of, I think, the shortest sections we've done page count wise so far, but it does feel like one of the biggest, most stuffed episodes that we have to cover here. There's a lot going on in this episode. I think there's a lot it's saying. I think we're starting to maybe get a clearer picture of what this book is trying to say about a great many things. And it's a wild ride. I think one of the big things to me too is just how absolutely kinetic the big action sequence in the middle of this week's reading is. Like, it's just fantastically tense writing from beginning to end.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I agree.
Let's begin it though. And we start with chapter 25. Jack and Wolfe go to hell, which I bet you thought was like a metaphor.
I did, I admit.
We resume our reading right where we left off last week with Jack post-torture realizing they have to get out of Sunlight home right away, and he's got a plan. And he tells it to Wolfe and has Wolfe recite the plan back to him. And here we have, after breakfast, I go into the bathroom across from the common room. I go into the first stall. If no one notices I'm gone, you'll come in, and we'll go back to the territories. Is that right, Jackie? That's it, Jack said. He put a hand on Wolfe's shoulder and squeezed it. Wolfe smiled wanly. Jack hesitated and said, I'm sorry I got you into this. It's all my fault. No, Jack, Wolfe said kindly. We'll try this. Maybe. A small, wistful hope seemed to glimmer briefly in Wolfe's eyes. Yes, Jack said. Maybe. I think this to me, and maybe it's just because it's the very beginning of the very first chapter in the section of the book that you and I packaged together to talk on this podcast, but this moment feels to me like the collective moment where both King Orstraub or King Anstraub decided that they were going to kill Wolfe. Like they're in the writing process and they get to this moment and they write this and they're like, oh, we're going to kill him. Because this really feels like, to me, the first moment of laying the groundwork for this guy is not getting out of this alive.
Yeah, I have to say that I was pretty sure up until about this point that he wasn't going to die. Like it would be too much. It would be like killing a beloved character, like, I don't know, Oi. Oh, fuck. What I'm saying is, I sort of calculated, like, this is a boon companion who's going to be with us to the end. Mm-hmm. That's the type of character he is. He's not a character who dies nobly, at roughly the midpoint. But apparently he is. And so I had a misapprehension there, which that's neither good or bad. It just sometimes you guess wrong. But no, I agree with what you said. Like this point toward the beginning of this week's reading seems like a watershed where everything from here on feels like we're rolling downhill toward Wolfe's inevitable death.
Yeah, no, and it makes it. I think that's one interesting thing about rereading this is knowing that we're sprinting towards Wolfe's death at this point. It becomes so much more transparent that here it is. We're laying the groundwork. I mean, it's one thing to say Wolfe was dying, which is what we had a lot last week. If Wolfe is dying, he's wasting away. He can't live here. that feels like it's a ticking clock for us in order to ramp up tension and put a time limit on our character to get out of things. This is just, it's not even like, if you don't hurry up, Wolfe will die. It's just like, we're boned.
Yeah.
And the best we can hope for is that at least one of us makes it out of this thing alive.
Right. The wistful hope there, I think, is the key, because it's like he doesn't even really think he's going to make it.
Yeah, I love that. There's a small wistful hope. And he doesn't buy it. He doesn't think he's going to make it. Jack barely does. And I think one thing that's important here that we will talk about again and again throughout this chapter is Jack's continued, I don't even know the right word, his demand almost that everything that happens to the people around him is his fault. And this is like right here and now in this part, he's saying, I'm sorry I got you into this. This is all my fault, right? Yeah. And that is going to continue throughout this chapter where the first thing he does post Wolfe's death is say, I killed him. I did this. And that's a core characteristic of Jack that I think we've seen throughout this book so far.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. He always takes it onto himself. Yep.
So the two head to the bathroom stall and Jack attempts to flip. I think it's important to note here, Matt, that he doesn't know what he's doing. Right. He's just like desperate and he thinks it'll work, but he's never done this without his magic juice. He just knows he needs to. And so he just like tries real hard. Mm-hmm. And I love the description of him trying real hard. It says he bore down with all his force, all his effort of will, and the ease with which they flipped was stupefying, as if a punch aimed at something which looked like granite hit a cleverly painted papier-mâché shell instead, so that the blow you thought would break all your knuckles instead encountered no resistance at all. So not only does he flip, Matt, but he does it effortlessly. Like he does it easily. It's nothing.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew he could do it. It's interesting to consider, is this just something that he could always do, or did he have to build up to this,
Yeah, I feel like it's just like you need to convince yourself that it's possible. And the cheap, terrible wine is kind of like just a path towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Because the first time he used the wine, even it was like sort of tenuous. It was my recollection of it anyway. Yeah. But it's also kind of funny that like the wine was this one of the many ticking clock elements where it's like, oh no, he's gonna run out of the wine. It's like, no, it didn't matter at all, actually.
It doesn't actually matter. Yeah. I think that is one thing that I think we'll circle back around to as well later in the chapter. The story kind of continuously sets up these ticking clocks or these elements that you feel are definitely going to pay off in one way or another. And then it just goes, no, just kidding. We're going a different direction. I feel like that's a King thing, because I feel like we've talked about that with other books as well.
I think it's a King thing, but I think it's also just a good writing thing, honestly, is to set up, I think about this a lot in context of George R.R. Martin too, as well, where like very often there'll be an announced plan and then a secondary plan that you can figure out if you're paying attention that you think is going to happen. But then what always happens is the third thing, which makes sense in retrospect, but you never expected a priori. I'm just like good twisty storytelling, basically. But no, I agree with you. Like, this is a thing that King likes to do.
It's not that it's inherently bad to write a story that is predictable enough that you can kind of gesture towards something and people can see it coming. But I think, we live in this world where every single consumer of stories is so story savvy, that like they can very, very quickly pick up on the fact that you're laying the groundwork for something that's going to pay off. And it can be very satisfying when you say, nope, not that, this instead.
Yeah. Exactly. You just have to make sure that it makes sense in retrospect, I think.
Right. Yeah. So the two flip back over into the territories and find themselves in, as we said, literal hell. Literally, they're in hell.
What?
A giant pit. Wolfe says a pit Oh, Jackie, it's a pit. Furnaces of the Black Heart down there. Black Heart at the middle of the world. Can't stay, Jackie. It's the worst bad there is.
Yeah, it's like fantastically operatically bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds you of all the like demonic stuff in Fantasia. It's just it's pretty surprising, actually.
Yeah, and it also helps, continue this idea of what the territories means and what it is, right? Because we have this place, and we've kind of been saying again and again throughout the book that things are more there. So like the smells are more, the sounds are more, the air feels fresher, more alive. So it's like this place and where the good is accentuated, but obviously the bad is accentuated as well. And we have a place like the Sunlight Home, which is a monstrous, terrible, evil place. And the territories version of that, of course, is a literal slave pit in which people are being beaten and killed constantly in the fires and the furnaces of the Black Heart at the center of the world. It's this perfect metaphorical image of just how just evil this place is.
Yeah, it's I like that, actually. The because it's a mundane place, but it's the metaphysical manifestation of the mundane place, and it shows you how evil it is. Yeah, like
and that hellish pit is, as we see, a prison with a bunch of naked prisoners being chained to carts, whipped on by their vicious slave drivers, whom Jack describes as literal gargoyles. Mm-hmm. So I guess, what was your reaction here? I want to know, because this, you've kind of long held this general theory that the territories in Midworld are basically interchangeable. How does this alter that theory, if it does?
I mean, I've been moving more toward the idea that this is another world, perhaps related to Midworld, ever since a couple weeks ago that I think it was Jack's father mentioned something about the idea that there might be more than one other world, Mm-hmm. But like the fact that there are gargoyles which look like demons is not very familiar. Like we haven't really seen that in the Dark Tower at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only thing about this that feels familiar is it kind of reminds me of what the Quartet of 19 saw when they were crossing the wasteland in Blaine.
Sure.
And maybe I'm really reaching here, but that's fine. But maybe this source of powerful evil magic at the heart of the territories is something that Morgan is after specifically. And maybe this is also what the old ones were after. And maybe the old ones got their hands on it and it destroyed their world with demons and stuff. So I know I'm reaching because I'm connecting things that were definitely like not like designed to be connected. But it's fun to imagine that like the reason why the territories are not quite Midworld is that, well, this is not just Stephen King. This is Stephen King and Peter Straub. And
sure.
And so it's not Stephen King channeling Maturin along the beam, because Peter Straub maybe is a different, beam or something. and so we've got a different world associated with that collaboration.
No, yeah, I love it. I think you're onto something there. And I do love this idea of the connection to the Wastelands, though, because you're right. I mean, one of the things we kind of were told about Midworld is there is, especially in the bowels of Endworld, there is this great, incredible darkness there trying to bust out. I mean, remember when they were kind of chased out of the hallways in the facility there, and there's also, we did see in the Wastelands as they crossed them, horrible beasts and monsters, poking up from the ground. Like, so there is this general broad idea of like in the core of Midworld, there is some great, terrible evil. And maybe this is just another tap into that.
Yeah. It could be literally the core of Midworld. It could be magically adjacent to Midworld, but in either case, I agree with you that is present. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do love, this is something I want to talk to you about for a bit, because one of the details we hear in this moment is they flip over at the edge of a pit. And one of the details we're told is that, Jack told Wolfe to go into the first stall in the bathroom. And when Jack walks into the bathroom, Wolfe is like in the fourth stall. So he didn't listen. And Jack, there's a little moment of frustration with him as he walks into this, like, this guy can't even fucking listen to me. And he sees here when he flips over that had they gone into that first stall, they would have been just over the pit instead of on a safe space where they stand. So Wolfe's error in this case saved them. And I'm just curious, what do you make of this?
Ka. I mean, I think if we're going to have a rational explanation for it, maybe Wolfe just has some kind of sixth sense about the territories, because he's a creature of the territories. And
yeah,
so
I like that.
He knew that somehow.
I like that. I mean, this idea that, like, I mean, there's two ways you can go here, right? You can say that Wolfe did this intentionally, like intentionally walked into the bathroom, sniffed it out, and said that first stall smells wrong. You know, there's a smell there that I don't like. And that could be related to his territories. Or you could go again to this idea of Ka, this idea of some sort of greater power existing and watching over our characters in a way that allows them to choose correctly in a situation that would have doomed them and thus ended the story, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
And I don't think it matters which of those two it is, but I do think it's very interesting here that, like, we didn't have to do this, right? We didn't have to have this moment where Jack looks and says, oh, this I could have fucked everything up, and it's Wolfe's either incompetence or hidden intelligence that saved the day here.
Yeah, that's I like both of these lenses. It's interesting to think about, and it's I guess what's fun about it is that it isn't cleared up for us. Like
sure.
the book never suggests explicitly that Wolfe has a sixth sense for these things, certainly. So you're just left to think about it.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because it does this. It introduces this idea of Wolfe with a sixth sense or a higher power. But I think the other thing it does is start to, you know, play the greatest hits of the Wolfe and Jack relationship, which is one of, you know, deep love and respect, but also a little bit of contention on Jack's part, where, like, Wolfe was a source of annoyance for him for a lot of their journey. He was making things difficult for him, intentionally or no. And we're playing that beat again here at this moment where he's a little annoyed with him, and then he realizes that, oh wait, no, this was actually better. And I think that kind of pays off in how everything goes at the end, because Wolfe saves him. The thing that is annoying about Wolfe ends up being the thing that saves Jack.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that is going thematically, but I guess that by itself is already interesting enough. Yeah. Okay.
So they decide they need to get out of here and back to the relative safety of the Sunlight home, and they prepare to flip. But before they do, they see one of the slave trip and a cart run over him, breaking his back. One of the gargoyle guards walks over to him and starts whipping him to death to finish him off. And he looks up at our characters, and we see that it's Ferd, Matt. It's Ferd Janklow.
God damn it.
There's your closure. You said you were going to be really mad if you didn't see your closure. Well, here it is.
That's not what I wanted to see. Damn it. I wanted him to have gotten away, and they would meet up at a crossroads and tip their hats to each other and go on their separate ways. When he's dead, he was in hell. They put him in hell, Scott. This book is evil. I mean, so in all seriousness, this book really is it goes to darker places than maybe I thought it was gonna, based on the beginning of it. Like, because the beginning of the book is almost, maybe I felt this way, especially coming off of the literal, you know, young adult book, Eyes of the Dragon. But I felt like we were going to do kind of a Narnia thing. We're like, oh, it's another world. That's fun. But then, like, it's just so sad and focusing on these horrible aspects of humanity. I mean, it's not that unusual for either Straub nor King. I think I was just thrown off by the kind of story that I thought we were in, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing to be said about this is that Stephen King writes this a lot, and Steven Spielberg optioned this book, you know, almost as soon as he wrote it. and has continued to hold on to this option because he really wanted to tell the story. And the thing about Amblin is everyone thinks about, Steven Spielberg and Amblin Entertainment as being these kid stories, but actually they're these, like, E.T. is a kid story, sure, but it's really fucking dark too, right?
Uh-huh.
Like E.T., the climax of E.T. is Elliot and the alien are both dying, and the government has thrown them in this spooky tube system that they've built over the house, and like we see Elliot like turning white and wasting away, and ET is doing it as it's really dramatic and dark. And I think this does match up very perfectly with early Amblin stuff where it's kid focused stories, but it actually goes to really dark places. I do agree with you that King and Straub take this to places darker than I think even Spielberg would go, and it's why I'm very interested to see what the eventual Talisman adaptation looks like. Are they going to pull their punches in some of the stuff, or are they going to go there with all this stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, because ultimately E.T. has a happy ending. No,
Yes.
Elliot doesn't get his back broken by a cart and then he's whipped to death. So, yeah, I agree. I was actually thinking this week specifically, like, why hasn't there been an adaptation of this movie? And I think my answer is basically along the lines of what you just said, where it's like, well, how do you market a movie that's sort of about a kid, but also way too dark to be a kid's movie?
Yeah. But I mean, that's Stranger Things.
Yeah, true.
Stranger Things is, a movie or a television show in the King Spielberg grand tradition that is actually rather dark. And again, I don't think Stranger Things goes quite as dark as this book does, but I think that's the lane. And that's that's, by the way, why Spielberg teamed up with the creators of Stranger Things to finally bring Talisman to the screen, because it's a perfect match, I think.
I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, I believe the Duffer Brothers is the name of the guys who made Stranger Things. Yeah, they are the ones. I believe it's a miniseries as well. I don't know if this project is still alive. I haven't checked recently, but I think it is.
Okay, I'm super curious. I'm not gonna interrupt the podcast to look right now, but I am excited to hear about that. There's also a Jackie Chan film.
What?
There's also a short made in 2008.
What?
There's the Talisman. It's a short. Directed by
oh my God, the Jackie Chan film. That's a fucking terrible movie.
No, this is an adaptation of The Talisman by Stephen King.
Is that a Dollar Baby?
I have no idea. It's 7 minutes. I'm so confused about what I'm looking at right now.
This doesn't seem real, Matt.
It might not be. I think
you made this up.
I mean, I'm going to send you this link.
Okay. But The Talisman is also a movie starring Jackie Chan that is just not good at all.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Oh my God. Oh wait, is it called? I think it's called The Medallion.
The Jackie Chan movie, I think, is called The Talisman. I think you're right.
No, I think it's called The Medallion. I think it was probably Talisman I think when they released it in the US, it was called The Medallion, but it was probably called The Talisman in Hong Kong or something.
Probably right.
Anyway, that doesn't matter because that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about Stephen King's and Peter Straub's The Talisman.
That's true.
So the two flip back into the bathroom and find themselves in some real world trouble. We see that Andy, Sonny, and Hecht are all in the bathroom, and they are equipped with some good old fashioned gay panic, thinking the two boys were up to some evil gay stuff in the bathroom stall and are ready to kick the shit out of them.
It's kind of funny that they persist in the gay panic angle when, like, it's way more plausible that the boys were just looking for a place where they could privately plot an escape or something, given that they know the rooms are bugged. They just fixate on the idea that they were doing something sexual, and it's like,
yeah.
I guess it's not that unusual. Like this strikes me as the kind of thing that like teenage boys would actually do.
I think it's a combination of the teenage boyness of it all, and also these are teenage boys that are products of Reverend Sunlight Gardner, who seems to have a special bee in his bonnet for homosexuality, as the worst. I mean, there's a quote later is like there's only a few sins worse than sodomy, but I think this guy did it. It's this very specific kind of I'm religious, but really what I am is homophobic, and I'm using my religion as wonderful cover. And he's obviously passed that down. Like, I think the sermon that we hear being played over the death of Wolfe is him, threatening fire and brimstone for these impure homosexual thoughts. It's very old school evil preacher stuff to be like this adamant against homosexuality. And obviously he's warped the kids' minds with this, kind of taken that, I think you're right, that kind of general like teenage boy assholeness who thinks it's hilarious to like talk about gay people, and turned that up to 11 with the evilness of it all.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there.
I love Jack in this moment though, Matt. He just like, the first thing he does is he just like pistons out and punches Sonny right in the fucking nose and breaks his nose. And then he thinks to himself, we're doing good, Wolfe. You broke his hand, I broke his nose. We're fucking awesome. And then he realizes, this is something we didn't talk about, but he realizes that Ferd, the gargoyle that was whipping Ferd to death, was the twinner of Hecht Bass. He realizes that in this moment, and in that moment, like, it drives him to a rage where he just like fucking just kicks the shit out of him, like almost does this like jump kick in his chest, where he just like throws him back in the stall. Like, this is a Jack that is just done with this, and the strength and the confidence with which he holds himself here is just kind of remarkable.
Yeah. First note there is that Muller continues to do a like nasally voice for Sonny for the rest of the book, because
that's great. He's got a broken nose.
He's got a broken nose. But then, yeah, I agree. Like, Jack's ability to go from zero to violence here is another big signpost of character change. This experience has given him a kind of desperation, and like aggressiveness that even, being trapped in the shitty bar didn't actually invoke.
I mean, that you're right, because like, I think that there's a clear line we can draw here between Jack, at the very beginning standing up to the hotel clerk, to Jack standing up to Smokey, to Jack standing up to these kids here, and it's this escalation of action, right? Like in the first one, he kind of, against the hotel clerk, he kind of talked back to him and then is immediately rebuffed by the guy. With Smokey, he stood up to him and caused this moment of like, whoa, from Smokey, who very quickly gathered himself and then just beat the shit out of Jack.
Right.
And here, like, he's escalated beyond just, this kind of presence of toughness to, I'm going to have that presence and then I'm going to follow through with it in a very specific way.
Right. That's the lesson, basically. Like, he didn't have the lesson yet with Smokey. Smokey. Where, he got hit and he was shocked. He was shocked, and he was instantly defeated. Yeah. And here it's like, you hit me, I'm going to hit you right back immediately. And it's like a kind of fearlessness from having kind of hit progressively lower and lower levels, where he's like, well, I get that there's no way out of this other than to defend myself and to be aggressive in that way.
Is that a good thing?
I was just gonna go there, like, because it's very tempting to just be like, yeah, Jack, fuck him up. This is awesome. But like, I don't really feel that, actually. I kind of feel like Jack is, maybe he needs a little bit of tempering, past this point, right? He doesn't, because the lesson he's supposed to learn in his journey isn't just like, be willing to hurt people for what you want. It has to be like, be willing to hurt people for what's right, for what's just, to defend, the weak, to defend yourself against evil. And maybe he's going to learn kind of those nuances and wrinkles in the rest of the book. I don't know. I'm not doing a good job predicting what's going to happen in this book, by the way. But
it's a difficult book in that regard, so I don't blame you for that.
But at this point, I don't see it as intrinsically a good thing. Like it could go either way, I guess is what I would say.
I mean, there certainly is some righteousness to it when it's, these fucking goons that are, just the yes men of a terrible evil man in Sunlight Gardener. Like you certainly don't feel bad for Hecht or Sunny in this particular moment. I do think this ties really perfectly into what we're going to be talking about in the next chapter, though, which is the horrifying massacre that Wolfe commits on the Sunlight home, which it has this really interesting shade of righteous justice and also horror and terror and this real feeling of, am I supposed to feel good about this? And I think I'll leave that conversation until we actually get to it. But I think there's a through line here, right? There's a through line between how we're feeling about this fuck yeah moment of Jack to paying it off later with, well, maybe righteous violence is sometimes necessary, but we shouldn't be like happy about it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There is a through line connecting this ambiguity of the necessity of violence, which might feel good, but doesn't mean it necessarily is good.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, old Reverend Sunlight Gardener shows up in the middle of this fight and kind of effectively puts an end to it. And then we see this line here where he says, "I think that you and your friend have been doing something even worse than sodomy, however," Gardner went on in his mellow, regretful voice, "going to places better left to your elders and betters, perhaps." Sonny Singer and Hector Bass exchanged a startled, uneasy look. I love that little added beat there at the very end, right? And that's why I pulled this, is this Gardner stating outright that, like, you did this terrible thing, which is flipping over to the territories. And then this clear indication that both Hecht and Sonny know what that is.
Right. It's giving us a hint at like the greater territories conspiracy, where even if maybe they vaguely know what it is, it's now we're about to learn that Gardner knows what it is and knows what it is via Sloat, so they have a real world connection. So like we're just getting a bigger. It went from this weird thing that maybe only Jack knew about to this thing that now, like, I don't know, a whole bunch of people know about actually.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps getting more complicated as well too, because so Hecht is aware of the territories, and we know that Hecht's twinner in the territories is this monstrous gargoyle guard thing. And if we continue on our central metaphor of the territories, kind of reveals the thing under the surface, right? So with Sunlight Home, it's this hellish slave pit. With Hecht, it's this monstrous gargoyle. And so it almost, this is, I mean, jumping ahead a bit to our time with Richard at Thayer, it almost is like us talking about and being confused with the practicality of like, well, what is a twinner and how does it work? And like, do they both exist in the same time, but then they occupy each other's body? Like, we're trying to break this down in a rational, logical kind of way. And I think Jax would just be like, that's magic, baby. Like it functions primarily, at least so far in the story, on metaphor specifically and not practical logic.
Yeah. This is not a Sanderson's Three Laws type situation. I'm sort of, honestly, I didn't even think much about the practicalities of it this week. I was experiencing it more in like a fantasy mode or even like a fairy tale mode, rather than trying to nail down the ins and outs of it.
Yeah, I think that's good. So the Reverend knocks both boys out with a sedative, and our chapter ends, and we move right into chapter 26, Wolfe in the Box. And the opening of this chapter, Matt, this incredibly sad chapter, is interesting because Jack wakes up long before Gardner thinks he should be able to wake up. He says, I gave him the sedative. He should be out for hours. Someone says briefly, I think he's up, and Gardner immediately dismisses that. But we know that Jack is indeed up. And we know that for a while, Jack is successful in making it seem like he's asleep when he's not. And I find this interesting because it doesn't really pay off. Like, like the standard thing in this kind of situation, right? Where you create this situation in which a person is believed to be unconscious, but is actually conscious. And so they are going to use that misdirect, that misinformation, in a way that benefits them to escape their situation, right? That's like the standard trope around this kind of event. And that's not the way it plays out here. Jack pretends to be knocked out for a while, and then just like halfway through his conversation, Gardner notices that he's really awake, and the end, it doesn't matter. It doesn't play out in any kind of way. What'd you think of that?
Yeah, I guess he only hears he hears some stuff that he shouldn't have heard maybe, and then maybe he leverages that understanding a little bit. But I don't know. Yeah, you're right that it wasn't used in kind of the way that you would expect.
He does hear some stuff that he maybe wouldn't have heard, but also maybe he does, like, because at this point it doesn't seem like Gardner is like holding stuff back from him.
That's true.
I mean, like the things that he hears is that Sloat is coming, and he's got to go leave to get Sloat in a few minutes to meet up with him. And I just don't feel like at this point that would be something Gardner would be hiding from Jack. He thinks he's won, and so he wouldn't be hiding that from Jack. The only thing I can think of as like a practical, actual, like what this does is it demonstrates to us, the reader, that there is a mismatch here of belief in one's power, right? That Gardner believes that Jack can't possibly be conscious, and he believes he's won, and that is ultimately his downfall, is this overconfidence in his ability to control the situation. And so this is kind of a precursor to that in just a little microcosm of that whole greater thing, that he believes that Jack is unconscious. He's not. He's wrong. He believes that he's in control of this situation. He's not. He's wrong. And so that kind of just tees up the greater fall of Gardner that is to come.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you could flip it and say it's not just his hubris, but it's people underestimating Jack and not really seeing what, how strong Jack really is.
Yeah.
Now it's, could entirely be that Gardner, miscalculated how long that much sedative should keep a boy unconscious, but it could also be that Jack is like literally getting supernaturally stronger. Because we have seen this thing where he's like supernaturally charismatic now.
Yeah.
So for all we know, Gardner didn't so much make a mistake in his actions as in his assessment. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting how many things that we're talking about this week are sort of about ambiguities or like things that can be taken two different ways. And it's interesting to consider either way.
Yeah, I mean, another angle on this is, what we've been talking about with children and the powerlessness they feel. And one of the things that Jack is doing on this journey is taking power to solve his problems. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. And here we have a person who, because he sees a child here, underestimates this child's power to his downfall. And that is part and parcel of the idea of a child, actively seeking out to regain their power. They treat him like he's powerless. He is powerless in a lot of ways, but not as powerless as you think.
Yeah, and if you back him into a corner, then you've made a mistake.
And also, I mean, same thing with Wolfe, right? Like the metaphor of the monster within. I've seen werewolfism compared to puberty before in stories, right? I mean, it works. Suddenly you're growing hair in places that you didn't have, and you have wild emotion swings. Like it works as a metaphor for puberty. And that is Wolfe kind of coming into his own power.
Yeah. And hungers. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of, one thing that I hadn't mentioned or that we hadn't talked about is, everything's done for a reason in stories. Okay, so why a werewolf, right? Why a werewolf in this story? And I think you're exactly right to say, well, what is a werewolf? A werewolf is a creature of duality. Much like the concept of having a twinner is a concept of duality. Duality is riven throughout the whole story. So the idea that there's a duality to Jack as well, that there's two sides to Jack, that he has his normal self and his Jason self, is something that we're clearly supposed to be picking up on.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more vivid.
I think the text will make that a little more literal here in a couple chapters, right? But I think that's interesting, right? Because one of the things we're told very early in the story, that the reason Jack is unique is because there is no duality to him, that he is one of a kind. And we are kind of seeing as the story continues that is not, it's a little more complicated than that. It's not exactly true, but it's interesting that like in this world of duality that everything has two sides, we're told, except for you, Jack, you're special. There's only you. You don't have a twinner.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So from here, we cut over to Wolfe, who has woken up once again in the box. He has spent the entire day howling again, and the stress has become too great. And we see here that Wolfe is going with the moon. And I want to read this part because I find this writing absolutely incredible, Matt. He felt it happen as the patch of sun coming in through the ventilation square began to rise higher and higher, as the quality of the light became reddish. It was too early to go with the moon. She was not fully pregnant yet, and it would hurt him. Yet it would happen, as it always happened to Wolfes eventually, in season or out of it, when they were pressed too long and too hard. Wolfe had held himself in check for a long time because it was what Jackie wanted. He had performed great heroisms for Jack in this world. Jack would dimly suspect some of them, yet never come close to apprehending the incredible depth and breadth. But now, he was dying, and he was going with the moon, and because the latter made the former seem more than bearable, almost holy and surely ordained, Wolfe went in relief and in gladness. I love that last sentence so much. I think it's just an incredible construction of a sentence.
Yeah, well, it makes us feel a little bit better about his impending death, too.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Just like, because the latter made the former seem more than bearable, almost holy and surely ordained, right? Like this idea that like, this is what is meant to happen. And therefore I will not stress about it happening anymore.
So doesn't that feel like a Straub sentence to you?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I knew you would agree.
This whole little bit feels a lot of Straub, but there's definitely some King in here as well, as we'll get to.
Yeah.
So we cut back over to Jack now, and I think this is what feels King to me. The structural conceit of the chapter kind of reveals itself at this moment, because from here on out, we do this rapid cutting back and forth between Jack suffering at the hands of Gardner and Wolfe slowly escaping from the box and wreaking havoc in the Sunlight home. And I just love the structure of this. I love the cut back and forth. I love going from one bad situation to another escalating situation. It just works to hold the tension and escalate the tension and maintain. It's great. It's great.
I mean, it's horrible. It's really intense and like it's. I want to be clear. Like I'm enjoying this book a lot, but like this isn't the fun kind of tension from like, Drawing of the Three is the one I always reference.
Sure.
Where it's like violent things are happening, but it's all kind of awesome and fun. This is just horrible, but yes, like you say, it's great. It's incredibly intense.
And we see here that Jack overhears Sunlight talking about Mr. Sloat arriving soon, which does kind of answer our question from last week. One of the questions we asked as we were going through the chapter is, why is Jack so concerned with telling the truth? Why is he hurting Wolfe and himself to hold the truth back here about where Gardner has met him before? And we see here that here's the answer, right? Because Gardner is in league with Sloat and he's called him. And so holding this information for as long as possible made sure that Sloat wouldn't find out about where he is. Which, does make sense in retrospect, right? And I think this was a really small quibble I have. It didn't hurt my overall enjoyment of those chapters last week, but I still think, even knowing what we know now, maybe the book could have handled that a lot better. Because, like, again, to reiterate my point from last week, what Jack is doing in this moment is choosing to doom Wolfe to torture, to protect his secret. And it needs to be just a little bit more clear that he understands, and that we understand why that is such an important choice.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
Anyway, we see that Gardner and his minions are counting money that the outside staffers have brought in. So, this is worth like revisiting a point from last week, right? So Gardner and his racket here doesn't miss a single trick. They're trying to get money from any and all sources. And while I still definitely agree with you that Gardner does this more for the power of it all, we do see here that he's doing it for the monies too. He does like getting that money.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think he likes to kind of amplify the power by having more money. It would be one way that I would think about it.
Yeah.
I admit that my perception of him shifted a bit this week because we see more of him. We see him in a position of weakness. Later on, we're going to see that he actually has a son, which implies that he has some of the more mundane, like I just saw him as this fantastical caricature, and learning that he has a son made me see him as a more human character. So overall, I guess I'm less surprised to see that he might just be a greedy son of a bitch on top of everything.
Sure. I do still think there's something to the idea of power, though, because the frame of reference of this scene is not, oh, look how much money we have. Ah, ha, ha, money. It's, ooh, this person's a little light on their envelopes this week. And so, like, you can kind of see this as just another way to control people, right? Like, you hold the owed collections that the outside staffers are bringing in from the outside over their heads in order to control those boys a little bit better.
Right. It's almost like he's happier when the envelopes are light, because that means he gets to, go get them.
Although, to your point, though, one of the interesting dynamics of this is like his minions here are like really wanting to be super harsh on the outside staffers. It's like, oh, this guy's really low again. And Gardner is always like, let's not worry about it yet. He's always like the much more like chill one about it. Like, so he's created and like wound up these monsters of his, and then like he's the one trying to kind of rein them in a little bit. I don't even know if that's true, because I'm not trying to say actually Gardner is a good dude. He's not. He's definitely not. But I do find it interesting that the dynamic of the scene is his minions like, I think this person's stealing again. I think this is going on. I think we need to shapen up this guy. And Gardner is always like, God, we'll figure it out. Well, it's fine. It's fine. Like, he's the more chill one in this.
Yeah, I think that he's just more calculating and secure in his power, and he knows when you need to exert yourself and when you can just rest on your laurels and kind of let things ride. And people's fear of him is already large enough that he doesn't have to like actively terrorize them anymore.
Sure. Yeah, that feels right to me. I like that.
Yeah.
So we cut back over to Wolfe now, except we're not in Wolfe's point of view anymore, Matt. We're in the point of view of Rudolph, the cook that Jack tried to bribe the other day. And they're just sitting there in the kitchen, and they're just hearing thud, thud, thud. And we know, of course, that Wolfe has gone with the moon, right? And so we're hearing from another person's perspective, Wolfe breaking out of his box. And I just love the writing here. Thud. The bolt at the top of the box's Dutch oven type door snapped in two. For a moment, there was a dark gap between the box and the door. Silence for a time. Then, thud. The bottom bolt creaked, bent. Thud. It snapped. The door of the box creaked open on its big, clumsy, homemade hinges. Two huge, heavily pelted feet poked out, soles up, long claws dug into the dust. Wolfe started to work his way out. So I think we've talked about this before, Matt, but I'm going to say it again here. I think, in my opinion, the number one thing to radically change and alter the way novels were written in the 20th century is the existence of motion pictures. And I think the time that this book takes place in and was written in, right around this time, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, we get this generation of novelists who were raised on movies. And this is the first moment that they're really starting to come into their own and put out their own work and their own unique voices. And I think you can tell that in the way they write. I think the way they construct scenes and sequences and moments in their novels, there's just something so fucking cinematic about them. And this scene in particular, this Wolfe breaking out of the box, and the subsequent moments where we're building tension that's about to boil over with Wolfe starting his rampage, it's a movie. It's just a movie that they're writing here. And I do think this is unique to to, you know, this century and beyond. And I think, you know, I say this without any evidence to support it, but my hypothesis is this is why people reading books from the 19th and 18th century, beyond the differences in language and word usage, it's so much more difficult for them to read them because people didn't write like this 200 years ago, you know, because they weren't. Stephen King is a movie buff. He loves movies. He writes like that sometimes.
I think you're onto something, because right here, like what makes us feel that this is cinematic is that the text is telling us where the camera is. It's constructing a scene out of a series of discrete shots. Like we're imagining images. And yeah, you're totally right that that idea was just not the way scenes were constructed. A scene in our mind is almost synonymous with a sequence of specific shots from a specific angle onto a subject. And that was just not an idea, you know, 100 years ago.
Right. I mean, just think like when you close your eyes and imagine something happening, you are constructing a movie scene. Like, and not everyone does this, certainly, but like, I think for the most part, our lives are so integrated with motion pictures and television as an art form that it is how we construct things in our head. It's just, and like, it makes me really wonder, you know, when someone in 1820 something closed their eyes and imagined a sequence of events, like how was that different?
Yeah.
In what ways was that different?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would bet you that we have internalized stuff like the 180 rule.
Yeah. And cutting, just the idea of cutting. Yeah. We've internalized.
Right. To the extent where even when you imagine something happening, you might imagine it following conventions of cinema that you don't even know the names for.
Yeah.
And then that's going to leak over into your writing.
Yeah. Like the writing here, I almost see cuts. I almost can see cuts in the way King constructs this sentence, or this paragraph rather. Like you almost see on the thud, you do a cut, and you can kind of in your head, if you think about it, see maybe he does like a quick push in with the camera too, to like accentuate the lock itself cracking. And then maybe the frame shakes a little bit. Like these are all things that I do subconsciously, automatically. And I think Stephen King does it too.
Yeah.
And he's not the only writer that writes this way. I think that this is just like, it's become so integrated with the way we process things and events that everyone writes in this way sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. I think there's some writers that don't. And I think there's some, I mean, it's funny, as we're thinking about this, I'm remembering that the main character of Worm has bug powers and can control bugs and see through the eyes of her bugs. Mm-hmm. And so like there's a lot of combat scenes where she has this holistic sort of overview sense of what's happening, but there's no like there is no discrete, you know, quote unquote camera, because her perception is everywhere, and they're written in a way that's very different from, you know, for example, this.
Sure.
And it's, you know, in that case, the author is kind of aware of what he's doing, and he's intentionally giving you this kind of floaty sense of awareness in contrast to specific frames and shots.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, definitely. So from here we move back to Jack, who's been discovered that he's really awake, and Gardner demands that he confess and starts burning the webbing between his fingers, which, ow.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I can confidently say that's never happened to me, and yet somehow I just can imagine how much that fucking hurts.
I mean, being burned is probably like the most painful thing that can happen to you in the short term, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've had a lot of, you know, horrible things happen to me in my life. Being burned is pretty bad. It's up there.
Yeah, the thing about burns is that it hurts initially, and then that pain just doesn't go away. Like burns just like ache in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah, and I mean, these are like real serious burns too. So he's probably going to have scars, and
it's awful.
Actually, didn't they burn both of his hands? Didn't they?
They did.
So he's got stigmata. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's Jesus. Like we're this is not subtle. He's Jesus.
He's Jesus for sure.
I do think so. I think it's interesting here. So first of all, we have Gardner, starting to drop the N-word like crazy, which just in case, Matt, you were a little uncertain on how bad of a dude this guy is. So we throw racism into the mix just for funsies.
As a treat.
But yeah, just a little amuse-bouche. He's basically demanding to know who taught Jack to quote unquote migrate to the territories, which is what he calls it. And so he knows who Speedy Parker is. He knows that Speedy Parker is around, and he's assuming that Speedy Parker is the one that told him, which is, it's kind of spot on. I do think it's interesting, and I want to talk to you about the use of the word migrate there, because like that's a very distinct word and distinctly different from Jack's description of flipping, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it has more of a connotation of permanence, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Because to Jack, it is this kind of just casual, like, I'm just going to flip over there real quick and I'll be right back. But migration is moving to a new habitat, is moving to a new place, moving to and migration isn't necessarily permanent, right? Like migrating birds, it's cyclical. But there is, you're right. There's definitely more permanence there. Yeah.
Well, it's, I mean, we know that slope can cross over, but that it's this much different effect. So maybe in everyone else's mind, what migrating means is you sort of morph into your twinner form. Whereas for Jack, he doesn't have a twinner form, so he literally is just flipping between the two places, and nobody else can really do that. Like nobody, Sloat qua Sloat cannot just step into the territories. He becomes Morgan when he steps into the territories.
Oh, I like that, because I happen to have the definition of migrate up here, just so I was making sure. And the second definition of the two is moving from one part of something to another. So literally moving to the other part of oneself.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So then we have this part here. Back and forth the flame went in front of Jack's eyes. Back and forth, back and forth. Sunlight Gardner looked like a cross between a stage hypnotist and some old-time actor playing the lead in a biography of a great scientist on the Late Late Show. Paul Mooney, maybe. It was funny. If he hadn't been so terrified, Jack would have laughed. And maybe he would laugh anyway. I still don't know what to do with this per se, but I find it really interesting, and I just want to flag it every time Jack continues to almost laugh at these high pressure, terrible situations that it almost feels inappropriate to be laughing at.
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of relate to something being so bad that it seems absurd. Although I don't know if I've ever actually laughed in those situations, but yeah, no, it's a choice they're making. Maybe we're building towards something. We'll see.
Yeah. So then we get this part here. After an eternity, Gardner pulled the Zippo back and snapped it shut. Fine beads of sweat covered his forehead. He was panting. Devils scream before they come out, he said. Oh, yes, indeed they do, don't they, boys? Yes, praise God, Warwick said. You pounded the nail, Sonny said. Oh, yes, I know it. Yes, indeed I do. I know the secrets of both boys and devils. I love this. There's so many things I love about this. I love the fact that Gardner is panting, that like it's making him more animalistic. He's panting like a dog here. I love that little detail. And the word choices of Sonny in this moment saying, you pounded that nail, I find really fascinating.
Yeah, because that's like a Wolfism, isn't it? Like, so is that like a subtle hint that these boys are also migrating, or is it just, or in contrast, are they just maybe absorbing some territories knowledge from Gardner? Who knows? Yeah,
I mean, because like think about it in context, right? Like devils scream before they come out. Oh, yes, indeed they do, don't they, boys? Yes, praise God, you pounded that nail. So like, I mean, is this the nail in the coffin? Like he's pounding the nail in the coffin of the devil, or the monster, or is this pounding the nail of the crucifixion?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the crucifixion one is actually. Well, okay, so that's the fun ambiguity. Once again, we have duality and ambiguity, because, pounding a nail into a coffin is an image, but so is pounding, and so like you could be the victor. You could be righteous if you're pounding a nail into a coffin, but if you're pounding the nail in the crucifixion, then you're definitely the bad guy.
Yeah. So that's what I love about it, because that ambiguity there allows it to exist in both ways, in which these are the guys that are using religion as their armor and shield, and they use a phrase there that could certainly mean pounding the nail into the coffin, and I do think that's what Sonny meant in this instance, but also they're doing this to, as we just stated, the Jesus figure of the book, and then we're talking about pounding nails. You're the baddie.
Yeah, they're talking about pounding nails, and they're also giving him stigmata at the time. Yeah. So clearly, I think you're right. I think the Jesus connection is pretty explicit here.
It's wonderful. So back and forth we go between Wolfe and Jack as the torture continues and the tension mounts, until finally George Irwinson goes to check out what that scratching at the door is. And he says, "Well, I'll show you there's nothing to be afraid of, chicken guts," George said heartily. "When you're strong in the Lord, there's never any need to be afraid." And the book immediately proves him wrong, because he opens the door and says, with this grand statement, he threw open the door. A huge, shaggy, shadowy thing stood on the threshold, its eyes blazing red from deep sockets. George's eyes tracked one paw as it rose in the windy autumn dark and wickered down. 6-inch claws gleamed in the kitchen's light. They tore George Irwinson's head from his neck, and his head flew across the room, spraying blood, to strike the shoes of laughing Donnie Keegan, the madly laughing Donnie Keegan. So here we go. This is the beginning. And as we kind of prefaced this, it's not that George Irwinson was like a good boy, but I mean, here's what you could do. All the boys here are fucked up, right? Right. All of them. They've been at the whims of this incredibly evil man, Sunlight Gardner, for a long time. And some of them are worse than others. Certainly Hecht and Sonny are monsters, and whether they were monsters before they got here or whether they were transformed into monsters by Gardner remains to be seen. But there's a lot of boys here that are just been hoodwinked by a professional con artist and asshole here. Right. And we're seeing them brutally murdered.
Yeah. I mean, they must have had hard lives to end up here in the first place, generally. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely interesting how many people Wolfe kills are not even on the list of people that we would call deserving. So once again, there's that ambiguity to violence, because it's like, well, we wanted Jack to escape, but man, this passes the point of being fun, deserved vengeance, into just like, holy shit, I feel sick,
Yeah, and they importantly, as you stated so aptly earlier, everything in the book happens for a reason, right? They could have written the scene in which we focus only on the kills that are the ones that feel righteous and correct, the Sonnies and the Hects, and we'd get those for sure. But we don't do that. We do show those kills, but we don't only show those kills. We're not giving our readers an easy out here.
Right, exactly.
So Wolfe charges into the school, and then we get our first real instance of Kef in this book, Matt, as Wolfe and Jack begin to communicate with each other with their minds.
Yeah. Maybe there were hints of it before, but Wolfe is in a very magical mode right now. So yeah. And also I think just storytelling wise, it works better to have like them being able to talk and communicate during this bit of the story.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love this part though, like to emphasize the point that we've been making and the thing we've been talking about. We see he thought Wolfe is riding with the moon. That thought brought a mixture of triumph and sorrow, right? So this idea that like, yes, this is good, but no, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. The duality is just everywhere, right? It kind of always has been, but it seems especially strong this week.
Yeah. So we get to see Wolfe take down Heck Bast, which is lovely. But I wanted to point something out interesting here. Before that happens, the section opens with the title saying, Heck Bast was deathly bored with confession. And the reason he's bored with confession is because he's heard all these trivial sins 1,000 times over. He's heard it all, these little minor sins, like I stole from my mom and I did this and I jerked off in the back. Like just, he doesn't care about it anymore and he's bored. And I pointed this out because it reminded me of another character we talked about earlier in this season. It reminded me of Father Callahan from Salem's Lot.
Okay. Sure. Go on. Is there more to it? Because I see what you mean. I think there's some connections there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just this through line of, you know, people that wear religion as their armor, wanting it to mean more than it normally does. You know, like Father Callahan, for those that might have forgotten or haven't read Salem's Lot, one of the ways we're introduced to Father Callahan is a priest that is so bored with the mundanities of being a priest that he doesn't care about these small town confessions and these small town problems. He wants to fight evil. He wants to be a crusader for the Lord. This is the thing that he feels like he should be doing, and he wants to do it. And of course, he literally gets that opportunity in Salem's Lot, and then is found lacking because, for many reasons we don't have to get into here. And yes, Heck Bast is not like Father Callahan. He's very different. But this is the same kind of core mentality of, you know, the mundanities of everyday sin, the mundanities of everyday wrongdoing are not what I got into this whole religion for. I got into religion to be a crusader, to dole out justice to the deserving. And that's what Heck Bast wants. And that's probably why he's so vicious and vindictive, because he wants to be in the army of God as he sees it. And yeah. So this kind of simple mundanity is not what he wants.
And it's this kind of character who doesn't realize that evil, you know, big E evil, is made out of all the little evils that are being perpetrated, for example, upon the kids in this place.
Yeah. And he like Father Callahan, comes face to face with the symbol of evil. Instead of a vampire, it's a werewolf, but the monstrous universal monster symbol of evil, and is found lacking.
Yeah.
So that's just fun. I don't even know if that connection's intentional. I don't think so, but it's fun to see.
Yeah, I would sort of guess not, but like in the way that this is a theme that I think King likes to play with. It's a connection.
Yep. So Wolfe eats him. Bye, Hecht.
Bye. Not one of the ones that we're particularly sorry to see die.
Nope, not at all. But it is worth mentioning, though, that there is some that we maybe feel a little bit sorry for here. We have this small vignette here in the middle of this horror show where we see a character named Peabody, who is notable in the story really only for being like one of the boys that was with the gang that surrounded Wolfe and Jack in the bathroom. I don't think he did anything specifically to them. He was just there with them. And he's one of the kids that was in the outside services that recently got rotated back to the Sunlight Home, which is just horrible timing for him. Sorry, bud. And I think he's basically serves as the King/Straub stand-in for how the regular folk at the Sunlight Home are handling this horrible massacre. And I think it paints a really terrifying picture. Like we see this moment here. He crawled into the desk, into the knee hole under the desk, wrapped his arms around his head, and began to pray assiduously that all of this should prove to be only a dream, the worst fucking nightmare he ever had. Which, as we talked about before, is interesting, right? Because I don't know, I feel bad for this guy. There's no, you know, like we haven't been told, like this isn't Sonny or Hecht that we're seeing here, you know, terrified, crawling under a desk. This is just some kid that we don't really know very well.
Right,
and it feels bad. You feel bad for him. Yeah.
No, it's sad and it's horrible. Like that was my sense during this whole part, was like, I am glad that Jack is going to get out. I'm glad that like the people who are torturing him are going to get punished, but I am like definitely upset by the fact that Wolfe, who we love, is doing all these horrible things. Like that makes it worse, right? Like it would be one thing if it was some random territories monster phased into the building and started killing kids. Like that would feel kind of neutral in a certain regard, because you'd be like, oh my God, that's awful, but I don't really care that much. But like, because it's Wolfe and you're like, oh, Wolfe doesn't want to be killing kids. Like
Yeah.
it's like part of the sadness is that it's Wolfe doing this.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like diminishing him, or it's just like the final indignity for Wolfe.
I think that's so true. I love that, actually, because like we don't know who Peabody is. And while we might, loosely feel bad that a kid is so terrified they're hiding under a desk, experiencing the worst nightmare they've ever had in their life, emotionally, we see this as, oh, Wolfe, like you don't really want to do this.
Right.
You don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
And we don't want you to be that person.
Yeah, we didn't want Wolfe to like, we were relieved when Wolfe didn't kill anybody. Like, specifically, there was a specific plot point where Jack was like, don't kill any humans. And he's like, I'll try. And and then he succeeds in not killing any humans. And you're like, yes, good Wolfe. And now he's lost that. And it's sad for him. It's sad for this noble creature that he was brought low in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So back with Jack and Gardner, we see the Reverend realizes that the police are coming. That's one thing we didn't note that Peabody also calls the police before he goes to hide under the desk. He's the only one with their head on straight in order to call the police. The Reverend...
Bring nukes if you can.
Yeah. The Reverend realizes that the police are coming, and therefore it's time he got out. He promises his minions that he'll get the car and come collect them afterwards, but Jack has the right of it right away, where he thinks to himself, he's running out on you, you stupid assholes.
Yeah, it's a great moment, which Mulder does perfect justice to. It's great.
Yeah. And then we see Jack use that information, right? He says to the two remaining boys there, he's not going to take you with him, Jack said suddenly. The sound of his voice surprised him a little. It was even and unafraid. And I love this because we need to give Jack something to do here, right? Like, we want to make Jack active and not passive in his escape from Sunlight Home. Like, yes, Wolfe is driving the majority of it, but I think both Straub and King recognize that Jack has to have some active part of it. And so part of that is he kind of pressures these boys into getting him out of the straitjacket, right? Like, he plays on their insecurities with Gardner blowing them off and kind of talks at least one of them down in a way that maybe saves his life in the long run.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important that he be out of the straitjacket when Wolfe arrives.
Yeah. So Wolfe finally arrives in the basement. He kills Casey, who in his dying accidentally cranks up the volume on one of Gardner's pre-recorded sermons. So this entire sequence takes place over Gardner preaching about hellfire and damnation, which again is just cinema. It's just pure cinema.
Yeah. When is the film adaptation coming? Because damn,
it's coming. It's coming. So Sonny raises a gun to kill Jack for some reason, but Wolfe arrives just in time. He manages to take down Sonny, but he's shot four times. They manage to kill all the boys, but Wolfe is injured, and we get this part here. Wolfe, no, he wailed and managed to get to his feet. He got halfway to Wolfe, slipped in a puddle of blood, went to one knee, got up again. No, Jackie. The voice was low, guttural, little more than a growl, but understandable. And incredibly, Wolfe was trying to smile, which is just the fucking dagger.
Yeah.
He's just twisting the knife. And so here Wolfe dies, Matt. Or as he says, he goes back home, knowing that in the end, in his final moments, he kept his herd safe.
Yeah, so he's fine. So he just went back home.
Yeah, he just went home. He just
good.
It is interesting. I mean, that is a detail that I don't think we knew, that he dies. He's a person of the territories, and when he dies in our world, he disappears. He Jedis out of there.
Yeah. Which it's I don't know what to think about that exactly. It's like he's a creature of magic and metaphor in a sense. So so he can't really persist in our world. I guess it all makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. Here's the last line of this chapter I'm going to read, and then we need to move on. But I love this moment where it says, he felt his heart stagger and wrench in his chest. It would break. Oh yes, hearts could break. He felt that. And it's
Mhm.
just like, fuck you, Steven.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's great. My heart breaks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's the death of Wolfe, man. I mean, how you feeling about this?
So we talked in Dark Tower about the idea that like some deaths feel noble and leave you with kind of a warm feeling of, like, I think Boromir's death is famously one where you're like, sad Boromir's dead, but it was a great moment. Like, like it was a great moment. It was a great death. He got these. There was a noble sacrifice. He got a great speech. And then there's deaths like, for example, Oi, where you're just like, shit. Like, that didn't seem necessary. It was noble, but it was like it was like it wasn't necessary, you know. I don't know if I'm being clear there, but like this was more for me. This felt more like a sad, just a sad death that could have been avoided. Not that I'm saying like, oh, the character's messed up. This death could have been avoided. It's like it just felt more purely tragic and less like less sweet on the bittersweet scale. I would say more bitter. Personally,
sure, yeah. I think Eddie Dean is probably the best example to me of the senseless, pointless, why did you do this to me death? Because like to reiterate, he dies once the battle is over. They've won, it's over.
That's a better example than Oi, actually.
Yeah. Because I think Oi is a sacrificial death in the way that Jake is a sacrificial death, where they did sacrifice themselves to save someone, but you're still kind of pissed off about it because it seems so cruel.
Yeah.
It's not as satisfying as a Boromir type death, but it is still sacrificial. Where Eddie is meaningless and pointless. And I think Wolfe is closer to the Jake and Oi side of things than the Eddie Dean side of things, for sure.
I agree, plot wise he is. I'm just expressing being upset by it.
Well, sure. I totally understand that. And it's kind of remarkable, you know, with all the other deaths in this book series that we've talked about, our discussion question at the end of those episodes have always been, tell us your favorite moment with this character. And we didn't, spoilers for the end of the podcast, we didn't do that this week because Wolfe really hasn't been around long enough. He's you know, a burning star in our time here. We were with him for 3 weeks and now he's gone. And yet this is one of the hardest hitting deaths I've ever read. Yeah,
well, he's a canine companion, but but he can talk and he's a person. So
yeah,
that's just,
it's like Marley and Me, only Marley says it's okay.
It's okay.
Owen Wilson.
Right here and now, Owen Wilson.
Your nose looks great. It's not getting worse, Owen.
Oh, Scott.
I mean, it is like with age, his broken nose is like, I feel like it's like continuously breaking itself.
Oh my God, you're right. It's a curse. It's a curse.
Anyway, no, I find this death incredibly touching and tragic and terrible to read. I dread it every time I read this book. But I still love Wolfe. I think that's a testament to the strength of the character that I hate this fucking death, but I still love every time we see him, knowing that we're only going to be with him for a very short time.
Yeah. Makes sense.
All right, we move on to chapter 27, titled Jack Lights Out Again, and we enter this new chapter with Jack still reeling from the death of his friend. I love this opening bit here, just filled with grief. He's gone. Oh, yes, he's gone. And guess who killed him, Jack? Guess who? So, poor Jack taking it out on himself again, right? Like, this is like, once we prefaced this at the beginning of the show, but once again, man, like, he didn't kill Wolfe.
Yeah. Right. He didn't kill Wolfe. I mean, he's also in close proximity to the deaths of all these innocent boys. You know, but I think this is even more clearly not his fault because, like, the evil bastards kidnapped him and Wolfe, and they tortured Wolfe until he turned into a monster. That's not Jack's fault. The only mistake Jack made at all was like, well, he pulled Wolfe out of the territories and into our world to save him from Morgan. And it's like, well, was that a mistake? Because he would have gotten fried by Morgan. So
yeah.
So no, it's not a mistake. So as you say, this is not Jack's fault.
Yeah. Well, and I love here that he says, I can't, I'm tired. And whatever I do is the wrong thing. People get killed. And we know that that's not exactly true, right? Like he is still blaming himself for the earthquake that killed those people in New York. Right. And based on the understanding of how the territories works and how flipping works, him flipping over to the territories did not cause that. Whether or not,
Right.
what caused it is still kind of nebulous, but no, him flipping doesn't cause earthquakes. It just doesn't.
I mean, it was probably Morgan doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this, and, you know, to state it bluntly here, to get back to our Jack as Jesus metaphor here, you know, taking the sins of the world onto himself is like what Jesus's whole bag was, right?
Right.
And Jack seems to consistently do that same thing. Is every bad person's sin? Like, yes, Reverend Gardner's a monster, but this is all my fault. I'll take it. Here, it's me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It's taking this specifically the sins of the evil people around him onto himself too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's 100% intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. And so thus ends the Sunlight Home section of the Talisman, Matt. And before we move on, I guess we're kind of approaching, even though we're not approaching the end of a part in the book, we are certainly approaching the end of our kind of Odysseus-esque moment in our journey west here. So what are your overall thoughts and feelings on the Sunlight Home section of the novel?
Well, as we've talked about, the story is composed of these episodes of captivity interspersed with brief travel. Mm-hmm. Each of these episodes, I think, has been an opportunity for Jack to learn some lesson or other, or to grow in a specific way. And you know, it's funny. As an aside, I imagine that was a convenient way to write the book, like to divide things up location wise so that the authors didn't step on each other's toes. I don't know that that's how they did it, but it kind of feels like a smart way to do it.
Sure.
But overall, I mean, the Sunlight House was disturbing, upsetting. There's a lot of ideas about our world and the problems with our real world that obviously the authors were highlighting and talking about here. Mm-hmm. It's almost a political statement. I don't know. I think it literally is. So yeah, I found it very, very powerful. Like very, very. It was something I was thinking about when I wasn't reading. You know, like that sort of like. You know, you take the emotional tone of what you're reading with you off the page because it's so heavy.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I guess the last thing I'd say about it is like I kind of felt like most of what we talked about today felt very Straub, with dashes of maybe Straub mimicking King, but I don't. It didn't feel like, oh, that's just an authentic Stephen King line. You know, maybe you disagree, but it felt like pretty much everything we read today, I would have, or at least up through this point, I would call Straub.
I like that. I don't have any direct evidence to say one way or the other, but I do like imagining this idea where King creates this concept of the Sunlight Home, which feels like a very Kingian place to exist in his worlds. And he puts our characters there and shows the suffering that they're going through. And then he goes, Peter, I don't know how to get out of this. Mm-hmm. I got our characters here in this terrible place. I don't know what to do. And Straub takes that central idea and the threads that King has kind of laid, and he says, okay, I got it. Here we go. And I will pay homage to you as I do it. But man, the more I think about that, the more I think you're just spot on.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you that the like stuff that we talked about last week, a lot of the character work did feel very Kingian. So it honestly does feel like King set up this plot point and was like, all right, get Jack out of here now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I just feel like I have at this point, a sense of King's prose style, and like all of the Wolfe being a werewolf stuff. I was like, that just doesn't really feel like the way Stephen King would have written that.
Sure.
Could be wrong, but
yeah, I don't know. So we begin chapter 28, titled Jack's Dream, and we start out this chapter with Jack still in a little bit of grief, Matt. I love. To your point, I think this opening paragraph feels Straubian as well, and we can read it and see maybe if there's a point we can pinpoint it. But it says, "Of course he carried Wolfe with him. Wolfe had gone home, but a big loyal shadow rode besides Jack in all the trucks and Volkswagen vans and dusty cars pounding along the Illinois highways. The smiling ghost pierced Jack's heart. Sometimes he could almost see Wolfe's huge, hairy form bounding alongside, romping through the striped fields. Free, Wolfe beamed at him with pumpkin-colored eyes. When he jerked his eyes away, Jack felt the absence of a wolf hand folding itself around him. Now that he missed his friend so completely, the memory of his impatience with Wolfe shamed him, brought the blood to his face. He had thought about abandoning Wolfe more times than he could count. Shameful. Shameful. Wolfe had been... It took Jack a long time to take it in, but the word was noble. And this noble being, so out of place in this world, had died for him. So, I don't know. Like, there's just something about that doesn't necessarily feel King. It's good. I love it, but this feels like Peter Straub to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's down to the level of like the cadence of the sentences and the sentence structure, word choice, that sort of thing. But I agree, it doesn't make me feel like it's King for sure.
There's something about the sentence when he jerked his eyes away, Jack felt the absence of a wolf hand folding itself around his. That feels flowery in the very, it reminds me very specifically of Ghost Story and the way, Peter Straub like would set up new sections of that book when we're moving on to a new thing, and we'd have these like that intro prologue is so powerfully rich in writing, and this feels like that to me.
Yeah, that's a good connection. I agree.
All right, so Jack continues to hitch across Illinois, which I think it's worth. I just said Illinois. It's worth pointing out how, like, geographically, Jack has traveled quite a bit of distance. He started on the East Coast. He's in Illinois now. But, like, in pure mileage, he still has so much more to go.
Yeah. He's less than halfway across.
Yeah.
This book has really made me aware of how long New England is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you go down the neck of it, I've just not spent a ton of time in New England. And so the distances there don't really add up in my head. But when you look at the map, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a pretty long way.
Yeah. He's got so much more to go. But yeah, I mean, like he's traveled so far. Like imagine being 12 and leaving the East Coast and being in Illinois. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so little of that travel is in the territories, right? Like I love that the book started out with this idea that like, oh, a mile in the territories is like 4 miles here. So like you walk a day in the territories, you're making good progress, but he's just so rarely done that. And I don't know if you remember this, but like when he tells that to Speedy, he's like, oh, well, I'll just spend most of my travel in the territories and I'll make great time. And Speedy doesn't necessarily say that's not going to happen, but he kind of gestures towards it. And that's exactly how things have happened here.
Yeah, I definitely figured, I think I might have even said this on an earlier episode, like I thought he was going to go into the territories and then we were going to spend a lot of time in the territories. And well, we've spent some, but I think in terms of page count, feels like we've spent definitely the majority on Earth. Yeah,
and I think importantly, every moment of being trapped, as you pointed out, has been in our world.
That's true, yeah.
So lots to think about.
Yeah.
So he hitchhikes with a nice man that gives him a jacket, and then there's this moment here, Matt, that we got to talk about. Good, the man said. Now, if you ever find yourself standing out on a cold and windy road again, you can thank Miles P. Kiger of Ogden, Illinois, for saving your skin. Miles P. Kiger looked as though he were going to say more. The word hung on the air for a second. The man was still smiling. Then the smile warped into goofy embarrassment, and Kiger snapped his head forward. In the gray morning light, Jack saw a mottled red pattern spreading out across the man's cheeks. Your something skin? Oh no. I actually kind of love this. As much as it's uncomfortable, I think to me this moment has kind of justified all the other extensive moments of like potential pedophilia that Jack has encountered on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because when it happens here, Jack's reaction to this thing is just exhaustion, right? After everything that's happened to him, he is in almost literal hell at the Sunlight home. He finally escapes, and here on the road once again, the same problems happening again to him. Like this is a boy who has experienced constant change throughout this journey so far, and I think you could argue that the Sunlight home and his experiences there probably changed him more than anything else he's gone through so far. But I think this demonstrates that the world itself hasn't changed at all. And he's this changed man who is kind of returning out of this prison, out of this capture, changed. And he slots himself back in the world. And oh, wait, it's still all the same. And he's just like, fuck, man. Fuck. I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you saw this differently than me, but I also saw some element of like his new aura influencing this guy to some degree, one way or the other. I agree with everything you just said. I think there's a shading on this where like this guy, he does stop himself.
He does, yes.
And I think we're meant to take it differently. And it's like he seems like not a terrible guy, and maybe what he said or what he almost said was something that was like slipping out because of how kind of transcendental Jack is now, and that maybe he wouldn't have said normally. I don't know if I was meant to think that, but that was something that I thought in the moment while reading. It's a very complicated little moment though.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly want to. I mean, presumably there are people that have those terrible urges and choose never to act on them. Correct? Right. I would hope that that anyone who does that makes that choice to not ever act on that horrible, disgusting thing. And it seems like this could potentially be one of those men who finds himself allured by Jack in an incredibly inappropriate way and makes the choice to not act on that, which good for you. Good. Thank you for doing the right thing. But yeah, right. I mean, you're right that this interaction is distinctly different. And it's not because Jack Jack doesn't give him a story. Jack doesn't do anything because he's just grieving and tired and doesn't want to deal with any of this thing. And I got like Jack's oh no here wasn't out of fear. It's not like he's afraid of the man.
Right.
He's just tired.
Yeah, I feel like he's gone to a large degree past fear. I mean, the Sunlight house just, I don't want to say he's hit bottom because that's almost like tempting fate where like I'm sure that these authors can pile more on this poor kid, but he's so close to hitting bottom and having experienced such terrible things and been literally tortured with a lighter that it's like what worse could happen here, I mean, he's not going to let the guy do anything at this point, so it's like I don't know. It's definitely I like what you said a minute ago about it being like earning all of the other kind of pedophilia stuff that was in the book, where it's like, we were kind of building toward this moment.
Yeah. And I mean, I like this is to Jack an example of a man who did something nice for him, right? He gives him this incredibly warm and comfortable coat that he desperately needs, and yet under the surface of that, you wonder, I think one thing we need to make sure we're doing from now on is kind of wondering in the back of our heads every time we meet a new person, what his twinner would be like, what does the twinner of this man look like? And is it good? Or is it the version of this guy that does act on his urges and is monstrous? And I feel like Jack is maybe even subconsciously doing that with every person he meets now.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah. I like to imagine that it would be his self-control that would be the thing that would be amplified, but
yeah,
who knows how these things work.
Hopefully. Yeah. I don't know. But as you said, thankfully, Miles P. Kiger does not proposition Jack, but gets him out of his car as soon as possible to remove that temptation. And so Jack loses his ride, but maybe that's for the better. And then Jack spends the night in a cheap hotel, and he has a dream, which of course is our titular dream here. And anytime we have a dream, we have to talk about dream logic and what it all means, man. So we see here in this dream, at first we see it's Wolfe like climbing across what appears to be like a trench warfare-esque no man's land. He's dodging over barbed wire and leaping over trenches and trying to get towards Jack, who he's calling Jason. He's yelling at him, calling him Jason. But we see the space between them keeps growing, and Wolfe will never reach him, which is, a handy, pretty neat metaphor for the fact that Wolfe has gone out of his reach now, right? He's gone. This reunion between the two of them can never happen. It's unobtainable.
Yeah, he's entered the clearing.
Yeah. And in the second part of this dream, we see that Jack is holding the dying body of not Wolfe, but his old friend Richard Sloat, who we see here is also dying. And the text here says, Richard's upper body lurched against Jack's arms, and a long liquid sound escaped Richard's throat. And then Richard found Jack's eyes, which, with his own, suddenly clear and quiet eyes. Jason. The sound of the name, which was almost appropriate, hung softly in the stinking air. You killed me, Richards breathed out. Or, you killed E, since his lips could not meet to form one of the letters. Richard's eyes swam out of focus again, and his body seemed to grow instantly heavier in Jack's arms. There was no longer life in that body. Jason Delosian stared up in shock. And then the dream cuts off, and Jack wakes up here.
Yeah.
So that's a lot, Matt. Any thoughts about these dreams?
Well, Richard Sloat's gonna die. Well, no. So really, like, I think probably what we're getting at here is that Jack's beginning to fear that he's putting people in danger, that he's going to put Richard in danger by visiting him, as he feels that he has done to everyone on his journey, unfairly. Yes.
But we do have to at least gesture towards the through line in this dream, which is both of these men, Richard Sloat and Wolfe, are not calling him Jack. They are both calling him Jason. In fact, to the point where at the very end of his dream, he is not Jack. He is Jason. Like the moment is Jason Delosian stared up in shock. Like he's holding someone in his arms, and it's Jason staring up, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's either his, I think the question I was sort of asking was, is he kind of going into the territories when he dreams? Or is it magic? Or his dreams magic? Is he really becoming Jason when he dreams?
Yeah.
Which, the other half of the question is, like, does he really become Jason when he goes into the territories? Which is still, maybe. We don't really know.
Yeah. The story analyst in me, the from now on I'm going to call the Richard Sloat in me, hates dreams in stories, because dreams and stories are a place in which the logic of the world and the story itself can kind of just be thrown out of the window temporarily, and you can do whatever you want. And so analyzing a dream for us is like, I don't know, man. Like, is it a dream? Is it a prophecy? Is it someone communicating with him? Is the spirit of Jason Delosian, touching him in these moments and channeling through him in the who fucking knows, man?
I generally don't like dreams in fiction. It's funny. I think that the exceptions that we've talked about before were in The Dark Tower, where they're not really dreams. They're basically magical extensions of reality where there are rules. And even if the rules of like physical reality don't hold up, the rules of like narrative hold up.
Sure.
And this, I don't know. This is more of a Straub dream.
So every time you don't like something in this book, it's just easy to blame Peter Straub.
You're just saying that just because I've done it a couple times today. But no, this doesn't really feel like the way that that Stephen King has typically done dreams in the books that I've read so far. But
and which is not to say that King doesn't use dreams a lot in his stories. He certainly does. But yeah, they just don't give you a lot to hang on to. Like, there's not a lot to grip in a dream, especially one like this. Like, you leave that dream and you're just like, okay, so what am I supposed to feel with that? I think the simplest thing, the most clear thing is what you said at the beginning of this conversation, which is clearly Jack is reeling from the death of his friend and blaming himself for that and making assumptions that everyone he's around is going to die. And so he replaces his mind replaces the corpse of Wolfe with the corpse of Richard because he's assuming that he's going to get this guy killed as well. And he's dealing with, the guilt over that whole situation. But then you introduce the whole Jason stuff into it and you just confuse it. And I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
All right, so we move on to our final chapter of the week, chapter 29, Richard at Thayer. And as we stated, this last chapter of the week begins the next section of our story. I kind of sort of wish I had included this one in next week's and not this week's, but that's the way the cookie crumbles.
It is a major tonal break, but
yes.
Yeah.
So the section begins with almost like a comedic scene where Jack wanders into Thayer and almost immediately bumps into an RA named Etheridge who is trying to deal with some damn freshmen. Freshmen.
I found it pretty funny. It reminded me of being in college a little bit. Not that our RAs were ever actually yelling at us, but
and even if they had the authority, neither of our RAs would have ever actually done that. They were just like, whatever, man.
Yeah.
Turns out putting college students in charge of things like being an RA, not great unless they're people like Etheridge over here.
That's right. You always want to find a good Etheridge.
Yeah. Percy.
Never mind. Never mind.
Okay. So Jack heads over to Nelson House where he knows Richard lives, and this is where he sees his former best friend and the son of his greatest enemy, Richard Sloat, and we immediately get a description that kind of hints towards what type of person Richard is. And here, at the third window, relief. For here was Richard Sloat, his eyeglasses firmly hooked around his ears, his necktie knotted, his hands only slightly stained with ink, sitting erect at his desk and reading some fat book as if for dear life. So Richard Sloat is, I guess the word tightwad comes to mind when you think about him a little bit here.
Uh-huh.
And what I love here is that he is a total tightwad, but he doesn't seem to be either happy nor surprised to see Jack Sawyer knocking at his window at his boarding school in the middle of Illinois.
Yeah, right. He seems like a very unflappable character in a certain way.
Yeah.
It's very interesting though. I mean, I've always thought it was an interesting choice, even, before we met this character, that, Jack's best friend is the son of the villain.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. What are we going to do with that? And then now that we've met him, we're seeing all sorts of extra interesting stuff. So like, one thing that seems really evident from this chapter is like, just the vibe of your best friend from childhood, and now you're interacting with them as a older kid, and what's going to happen here. I feel like we've talked about the idea that you grow up with a particular friend and in our lives, and then maybe you grow apart from them when you get older into the college years maybe, and then you kind of have to make a decision at some point, like, are we gonna be able to keep this friendship going? And usually there's like a required adjustment to what the friend is going to grow into, and their adjustment for what you're going to grow into, to accommodate those changes. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and people drift apart. And so it kind of, this feels like these are two boys who are at that nexus of, and I think the text is pretty explicit about this. They're at that nexus of like, are we going to be friends really, or was this a childhood friend that has played itself out?
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things to me, though, is, and you'll have to tell me if this was your experience or you even got to experience this. I had my best friend, my close friend through my young childhood when I lived up in New Jersey. I moved when I was 7. I moved down to Texas, and I've basically spent the rest of my life there. But I did travel back to New Jersey 8 years later, when I was, I guess, 15, and I met up with that old friend. I met up with is my friend named Vincent, and we hung out. And the interesting thing to me was there was like this momentary moment of awkwardness between us, but then like 10 minutes later, it was like we never were apart. We just kind of interestingly eased back into this friendship as if nothing had changed. And the weird thing about this scene to me is that definitely doesn't happen here. Like I think there's this kind of, they're both holding each other at arm's length a little bit throughout this entire interaction.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems like they've changed in ways that are not amenable to each other. There's a core philosophical difference. I mean, the closest thing I have to that experience is I had a best friend when I was in Indonesia. The first time I lived there when I was like 8, and we left, and then we came back again when I was like 12. So that's a 4-year gap. And that friend in Indonesia was still going to the same school, and and we literally, it was literally like there was never any acknowledgement of the fact that I had left for 4 years. We just resumed being friends. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I find that really magical.
Yeah.
And I mean, that doesn't, like, just look at the way Richard says hello to him. Okay, hi. I suppose it's even sort of nice to see you, but I have to go to lunch pretty soon. You could take a shower, I guess. That's the first word Richard says to his best friend of childhood. Like, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's not super welcoming. I mean, it's funny because it does remind me of some of my friends who like, we've known each other so long that we can just be horribly blunt with each other. But
sure.
But that, I don't think that's what this is. Like, I think this is just Richard kind of being a dick, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, not to sell him short, because we'll see by the end of this chapter, he does, stick up for Jack in his own way.
Yeah.
But I do think some of what we're seeing here, and we know this because we've seen it from one of the slowed interludes, that Morgan has kind of been poisoning his son towards the Sawyers and Jack in particular, right?
Yeah.
He's been telling him, and we see this in this chapter as well, where Richard is kind of like, I can't believe what your mom is doing to my dad right now. It's ridiculous. Like, so we've been seeing Morgan kind of, lean on Richard in a lot of ways. So part of the weird damaged nature of this friendship is because of Morgan's influence.
That is true. That is true.
So Richard agrees to help Jack out only if the latter will promise to go back to New Hampshire. Jack says he'll at least consider it, which seems to be enough. And then Richard asks if this has anything to do with Seabrook Island stuff, which is a term we don't know, but then the book is happy to go ahead and explain it to us in a little vignette we get to see from this point on. And I think this is a really important moment in the story, Matt. I think this is the book kind of sort of declaring its thesis to us here, 2/3 of the way through it.
Yeah, it was a very revelatory moment to me. Like, like it felt like they were hiding from us this sort of crux of Jack's character, and then choosing to reveal it here, I think is nicely setting us up for some interesting interactions we're going to have with Richard. And I think it was probably wise to not dump this on us immediately, because it would be like an element that wasn't going to be resolved for hundreds of pages, and so it makes sense to withhold it.
I agree. I think we, throughout the last 4 or 5 weeks or so, have been kind of ruminating on the idea that, hey, we don't really know what this book is saying yet, right? And I think the reason is, you're right, is because a core part of what the book is saying is kind of wound up in the differences between Jack and Richard as human beings. And I guess a natural cause of that is that Richard doesn't enter the story until page 450 or whatever we're on. And so we really can't deal with that stuff directly until this moment. But I think that works because we're subjected to 400 pages of Jack, experiencing the magic stuff that he believes in so vehemently, and also like having a really rough time with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's not like he's having a great time with the magic stuff. Yeah.
So we learned that Jack and Richard's families used to vacation together in a place called Seabrook Island, South Carolina, and the year after Phil Sawyer's death, they tried to do it again one more time, and it became very clear that this was going to be the last time. Which, side note, okay, imagine the fucking stones on Morgan Sloat if he did indeed murder Jack's father, to then go on vacation and hang out on the beach with his family.
Yeah.
What a fucking prick.
Yeah. Yeah. He sucks mightily. I hope he dies horribly.
And then we get this paragraph here, which I think leads into what we were just talking about with kind of the thesis of the story. The death of Phil Sawyer had changed the very color of the future. Jack began to feel that final summer at Seabrook that he might not want to sit in the chair behind his father's desk, that he wanted more in his life. More what? He knew, this was one of the things he truly did know, that the powerful moreness was connected to the daydreams. When he had begun to see this in himself, he had become aware of something else, that his friend Richard was not only incapable of sensing the quality of moreness, but that in fact he quite clearly wanted its opposite. Richard wanted less. Richard did not want anything he could not respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think the one thing that jumped out to me about that paragraph, by the way, is that Jack was actually apparently taking the daydreams, quote unquote, more seriously than I had assumed.
Yeah, like at the beginning of the book, it kind of almost seems like this was a thing from his youth that he's kind of forgotten about.
Yeah.
And while technically true, we're seeing as the book goes on just how much that experience has informed who he is as a person.
Right. Yeah. It's like he told himself he had forgotten about it. He told himself he didn't believe in it. But at the same time, he was probably thinking about it a lot and was probably informing his thoughts more than he wanted to admit.
Yeah. So Richard here is a man of science. He wants to be a research chemist because he loves finding out how the world works. He wants to take everything apart to analyze it and understand it. Whereas Jack is not that way. Jack thinks there's more to life than order, capital O order, which is what Richard says, more to life than what one person could understand. Basically magic, in a word. And he believes and embraces this idea. And so we got to talk about this because we're kind of both Richard Sloats here, right? I mean, in a way, like you're an engineer in your day job. I am in IT. I'm an IT compliance dude. And so that's what we do. You literally take things apart to understand how they work so you can build them. I have the most boring job in the world that basically tries to deal with risk constantly. And also, this whole thing we're trying to do right now, this whole project, is to take a story and try to take it apart and understand how and why it works the way it does. So we're kind of Richards in that way, but not entirely.
I would say not entirely. I'm gonna do an unusual thing and be fair to myself for a minute and say, like, I think the reason why we do that in the first place is that we want to get in touch with the moreness and the magic that storytelling can bring and can create. It's a very left brain way of approaching storytelling. I agree, but it's from a place of loving it, right?
Sure.
I also think it's funny that one of our best friends is a research chemist, and he's also a very creative person. So
yeah, that is true. That's the real people are not like one of two things. Like they're more than that.
Exactly.
But I agree with you. I think, a lot of times when you get right down to it, like we can sit here and talk about a story for 2 minutes, or 2 minutes. We can talk about a story for 2 hours and talk about all the reasons why we think it worked, why this sentence achieved this, why this was sad, why this was. But at the end of the day, there really is, and we've talked about this before, just an ineffable nature to why this stuff works. Mm-hmm. There is magic happening in a good story that, you can learn how best to cast the spell, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, there's a fucking spell going off. Yeah. And that's incredible and powerful and something we can only get sort of close to understanding. And I agree with you. I think the reason why we're so attracted to this is because we want to get as close to possible to understand a thing that we know we can barely understand. Yeah.
Well, to me, it so maybe you've heard this anecdote, maybe not. I'll repeat it for the listeners. Richard Feynman is a famous physicist, and his anecdote that he tells is like he was on a walk with his friend who was of a literary bent, who was admiring the wildflowers, and was like, why do you always have to like reduce the beauty of everything down to an explanation? Like, I look at those wildflowers and I see the beautiful colors, and I'm just inspired by that experience. And Feynman is like, I look at the flowers, I see the same flowers you do, I have the same experience you do, but I can also then think about how all of the colors of light are actually reflecting the different wavelengths of the white light coming from the sun. And that all of the light that we're seeing is actually reflected from the sun, which is itself a beautiful thought. So I'm actually just perceiving what you're perceiving, except also perceiving additional layers of beauty. So the way I like to think about this is like, yeah, the book itself has its own magic, and then you can endlessly entertain yourself and get more and more magic out of it by looking at it from different angles. And that's what we're doing, right? Like we're finding / creating yet more magic in the act of trying to interact with these objects, with these literary objects.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot.
Cool.
Because it makes me sound good.
Yeah.
So the question, the fundamental question though here is, what is the book saying? So we said we think that this is kind of the book kind of peeling back the layer on what its core thesis is. And this is circling around the belief in magic, the belief in something more, versus this kind of stubborn refusal that Richard has to even acknowledge that there could be something beyond the things that we can understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because like it reminds me very much of the whole Dark Tower thing, where the magic and the technology are sort of opposed to each other. Yeah. With Richard sort of aligning with the technology here. I don't know if that's exactly what this book is doing, though. It doesn't really feel quite right. But I think what we're gonna do, my prediction for the next chapters is like what a lot of authors do with the theme they have is they have two different characters espouse two different sides of that theme and then argue about it. And I think that is what's going to happen here. And I think that's why we don't understand the theme yet, is that we haven't gotten to this point where we're going to have these two characters articulated to each other for our sake.
Sure. And I think the thing that is most clear is we know for a fact that in this world magic exists, right? Mm-hmm. There is another world. There are werewolves. These things that Jack is telling to Richard that happened to him did happen and are real. And Richard seems like the stubborn guy who tucks his sweaters into his belt. How is he going to react to if that magic, comes to his doorstep? It reminded me a lot of that question we asked back in Salem's Lot, right? What would it take for you to believe that there are vampires? And here we have, Richard basically being asked that same question, right? Jack comes to his door, tells him this fanciful story about Sunlight Home and werewolves and magic and other worlds and all these other things. And what is Richard's reaction to it? Well, to his credit, his reaction is, I don't believe you. I believe some of these things happened to you. I believe you were at the Sunlight Home. I believe you are traveling you ran away from home and are traveling across the United States for some reason. I do not believe there's another world, and I do not believe there's werewolves. And so he's kind about it, right? Yeah. I mean, he basically tells him, I'm not going to turn you in. I'm not going to call my dad, but I don't buy what you're selling.
Yeah. I mean, I think my take on his reaction is like, I don't think you're lying, but I think something horrible happened to you and you're messed up about it. And,
right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what we said to it, the answer of the vampire question, right? Like we would say, I don't think you were outright deceiving me if you came up to me and said there's a vampire in your kitchen, but I think something's going on with your brain and I'm concerned about you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly what Richard does here. He says, you can stay here. It'll be okay. But I'm worried about you. Make sure you get some rest because you really need it, because I'm very, very worried about you.
Yeah.
One small note we didn't cover this and I don't have much to say about it, but just this fun note that we do learn, as you said, that Reverend Sunlight Gardner has a son, and his son was Richard's roommate. But he has recently left the school because his father is wanted on charges of child slavery and abuse and just about every terrible thing you could think of. And so it turns out you can't go to a fancy boarding school when your dad is charged with those things. So poor Sunlight Jr. has to get out of there. But that's just delightful, right? Like the small worldness of it all.
That's some more Ka. And I mean, am I wrong in thinking like that literally freed up a bed for Jack to use?
You are not wrong. So he is sleeping in the bed of his former captor's son.
That's some Ka right there.
We also learned that this kid was a total sadist and monster, which, I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but it's just a fun little factoid for you there.
Yeah.
All right. So that is it for this week. Gosh, we went on long. We're at 2 hours already, and we haven't even gotten to discussion questions. So we're going to have to speed through these.
Yes, we are.
But that is the end of the chapter, and we're going to be moving into the last few chapters of part 3, Matt. I think next week we are finishing off part 3 of the book.
All right. Sounds great.
But let's talk discussion questions. So last week we asked, who is your favorite actually evil religious character or figure in storytelling? Matt.
Yes, Scott.
Sometimes you ask questions and you're like, this is a good question. And you don't think through the implications of what all the potential answers to the questions could be.
That does happen to us.
Including a plethora of real world figures that are, either some controversially bad and some uncontroversially bad, which is what we got in a lot of our answers. A lot of real world people. And I think we basically made the choice here to just focus on y'all's answers that had to do with storytelling, because, not every real world person will be offensive. Like I think, you can go ahead and say Charles Manson, not saying he was an evil religious nut, not gonna piss anyone off, really. Or at least the people it would piss off I don't care about those people. But there are certainly answers we got from people that would do that a whole lot. And also, like, when it's real world stuff and it's terrible and monstrous, it's a big bummer. And so I think we just made the unilateral across the board decision to just focus on y'all's answers that come from storytelling itself. Not saying we disagree with anything you said. I just don't want to go down that path. Yeah, I just don't want to.
It kind of turns the podcast into something that is not as fun and kind of not the vibe. And I think everybody's going to understand. So
I hope you all understand, and I hope you're not offended by that in any way. I just, there's plenty of terrible religious characters and stories that a lot of you named.
I think we'll just say it's our bad for not specifying fictional religious figure.
Yeah, our bad.
Because it just didn't even occur to me, honestly, but I guess it really should have.
It should have, yeah.
All right. So again, the discussion question was your favorite actually evil religious figure. Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says there's so many lunatic religious fanatics to choose from in King's work, but not all of them led other people. So I'll mention Mrs. Carmody in The Mist and Isaac from Children of the Corn. Mrs. Carmody is a character that struck me as being shrugged off by the townspeople prior to the apocalyptic events of The Mist. Then she preys on the fears of the weaker people trapped in the grocery store to ensnare them into her web and gain power. Isaac is just creepy as fuck. Yes, Children of the Corn is a terrible movie, but as an 11-year-old, the idea of a 12-year-old boy brainwashing children to murder their parents was terrifying.
It's a good answer. Miss Carmody is awful.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Having just watched both of those movies in the relatively recent past, fuck both of those characters.
Yeah. And I think the most important thing is, yes, Children of the Corn is indeed a terrible, terrible movie.
It indeed is.
I was so disappointed. I remembered liking that movie so much more. Ugh, what a bad movie.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Jerk Stabworthy, who says, my favorite religious villain in fiction has got to be the pious and corrupt Warden Norton of Shawshank State Penitentiary. I'm speaking mostly about the film adaptation, as it's been many years since I read the novella. Every action he takes is motivated from self-interest and greed. Even supposed acts of mercy are pointedly counteracted by acts of cruelty. He is callous, inhuman, and overtly evil, the perfect antithesis of what he presents himself to be as a Christian. When a seeming deus ex machina is dropped in the form of a cocky but likable young inmate, Tommy, who has information that could potentially exonerate the protagonist, his response is to have Tommy, a character introduced relatively late in the story, who has a full character arc that makes us care about and root for him, literally gunned down in cold blood. Also, he could keep having his taxes done for free. Yeah, I think, as we said when we covered that movie on our episode of Other Levels of the Tower, go to patreon.com/doofmedia to subscribe and hear it. They definitely made the movie version of Warden Norton kind of more explicitly evil in that regard. Spoilers for the novella, but the Warden does not have Tommy gunned down in cold blood in the novella. He just transfers him away from the prison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, still if we're just talking about the movie character, the fact that he is religious or uses religious language does make him even more hateable.
Yeah. It's this really kind of casual terribleness where he just drapes himself in the protection of religion, and then just does terrible things without seeming to understand how he's being a giant terrible hypocrite.
Right. That's kind of the worst part of it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Shortstop 88 says, on to the actual answer, while he doesn't necessarily use religion, he definitely makes himself seem better than those who oppose him due to his acting like a man of God. That'd be Big Jim the car salesman and second statesman of the main town of Chester's Mill in King's book, Under the Dome. I bring up BJ because Under the Dome was my first ever King book back when I was in middle school, because my dad bought it for me, since my twin brother's teacher said we should be reading at a high school level, and King was the only author my dad knew the name of. It was King's most recent book, and it was certainly a challenge. Anyways, Big Jim was my first instance of King showing off how terrible some religious people are, and he was definitely an early lens for me to look at the Christians around me and learn that that what they say isn't always right. I learned to stop worrying about swears because BJ hated them so much that I learned cluster mug as a word before I ever read/heard clusterfuck. BJ was a power-hungry, heartless bastard, and I see him in any televangelist or random radio pastor that I heard while driving through the country.
I know you can't comment on this, Matt, because you have not read this book, but yes, Big Jim, such a good villain. Under the Dome is such a fascinating book, and I think I love it. I really do. It's very long. It's one of King's doorstop novels, and it probably doesn't need to be as long as it is, but it's just a fascinating book that I just love so much.
Yeah, that's one that I'm curious about for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's just like it's one of those ones where, as you've said many times, the conceit is just a fascinating idea in general, which is just like, what if a whole town got put under a dome?
Yeah,
that'd be weird.
It couldn't get out.
and then we just kind of, for like 800 pages, we just kind of deal with the implications of all that, which include that the dome doesn't pass air through it as easily as the atmosphere does, and what would that look like over time, over several weeks and months. It's really good book.
Fascinating. Cool. Okay.
All right, next we have Pear Jane, who says, I chose the pitiable, horrifying Margaret White, whose twisted religion is thoroughly homegrown. Her religion has metastasized far beyond the traditional smug power grab and grown into a toxic cancer that's eating her and her daughter from the inside out. She's not interested in proselytizing so much as she wants to punish herself and destroy Carrie, who embodies her worst sin. Ironically, by not following a more banal American path of insincere religiosity, she manages to rack up a far higher body count than most of King's other evil religious folks. She utterly others Carrie and drives her to destroy an entire town, and thus proves herself right that her daughter is evil. She's the ultimate embodiment of the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah,
that's really well articulated. The idea that,
And I think it is an important part of Margaret White's character that of course she considers herself a Christian, a follower of Jesus, but Margaret White's version of Christianity is nothing that exists anywhere but in Margaret White's own head.
It's basically just the elaboration of some psychosis that's about punishing herself, as Pear says here.
Yeah.
All 84001 says, predictably, our fiction is likewise littered with evil, fanatical zealots. Art imitates life in the proverb. My favorites are the Magisterium from Philip Pullman's amazing series, His Dark Materials, and the Norse Fire Party from Alan Moore's classic V for Vendetta, and of course, the Republic of Gilead from Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. So diabolical. The best are always the ones that can convincingly warp morality into a twisted, bizarro logic that justifies the most heinous, truly evil acts. At least we can be content with that fact that they're fictional for now.
His Dark Materials. You know, like the will someone think of the children lady from The Simpsons? The hilarious thing about His Dark Materials is it's one of the only book series I've ever read where everything the super religious people that were worried about damaging the children said about it was 100% correct. It's like it's a book series about teaching children how bad like organized religion is. Like that's what it is, like textually is. Like that's what the series is about. That's like the ultimate conclusion of the book series is, hey, this is just bad. You shouldn't believe in it anymore.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's really funny.
Yeah, these are all good examples of organizations rather than individuals who really embody these kind of evil ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Next, we have Just Stand 8460, who says, I might have to go with the White Cloaks in the Wheel of Time series. I'm working from memory here, but each time they come up, I have reminded of their militant chauvinism, which is always so shrewd, judgmental, and above all, dangerous. They are a literal army who feel their jurisdiction ranges anywhere people walk in the light. They have a self-imposed authority to claim someone as a dark friend, and for their own purposes, maybe even put them to the question or kill them based on their own form of righteousness. Meanwhile, we find out that there's a sect of them called the Hand of the Light, or Inquisitors for short. Not going to editorialize on that, but nobody expects well, you get it.
Yeah, the White Cloaks are great. I love that. That's one of the elements of world building about Wheel of Time that I really appreciate, is that you have what is basically a religious order, but it doesn't like it sort of maps onto the Crusaders, but like kind of not really, because they don't have like a target of like, we must retake the Holy Land. They're really just like impassioned zealots of like, we must stamp out the dark wherever we find it. And then it's like, well, if you have that attitude, you're going to find the dark in a lot of really convenient places. And I find them to be actually a very kind of scary villain, considering this is a book with literal monsters in it. That the White Cloaks are some of the more like upsetting and scary, actually.
Sure. Sorry, you're next.
Financial Profit 58.4 said, Leper Messiah by Metallica hits this topic on the head perfectly. Time for lust, time for lie, time to kiss your life goodbye. Send me money, send me green, heaven you will meet. Make a contribution and you'll get a better seat. Bow to Leper Messiah. The characters that I would list are Carrie's mom from Carrie, the lady from The Mist, and Robert Pattinson's character from The Devil All the Time. Honestly, all the religious characters from The Devil All the Time.
Did you ever watch that movie?
No.
It has Tom Holland in it, and that movie. They're all bad, all of them.
I've never even heard of this movie. Fascinating.
It's not. I didn't love it, but
okay. Interesting.
It's based on a book that I haven't read.
Okay. Huh.
Drunk Phoenix 26 says 2 answers for the religious villain discussion question. 1, no spoilers, but Randall Flagg from The Stand. Shh, not yet. Number 2, the old lady from The Mist, Mrs. Carmody. That's a very popular answer, it seems, Matt. The book is good, but the movie ending is even better. True.
Yep. Next, we have from Walking Dude 22. Actually, I want to keep coming back to the 2 non-religious cult leaders King Julian in Madagascar, and Negan in The Walking Dead. Both are charismatic and fun to watch, delightfully evil. I am not sure they meet the criteria of the discussion. So my final answer, the chilling commanders of Margaret Atwood's novel The Handmaid's Tale, who use a combination of zealous theology and political power to enslave the fertile women who inhabit the dystopian world of Gilead.
Did you read that book, Handmaid's Tale?
Nope.
Have you watched any of the television show?
I have not.
I enjoyed the book. The book and the show are pretty different. I dropped the show like a year or so ago. Is it over now? I don't even know.
I don't know.
This rarely happens to me, but the show got to the point where I was just like, I'm kind of tired of seeing all these people suffer really terribly, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to get better for them. And I don't know why I want to subject myself to this anymore. And like, I rarely do that. Like, I sometimes roll my eyes at people who are like, oh, this thing was just too dark and too dour for me. Like, just like, come on, it's a story. Just watch it and move on. But this is one of those things where I was just like, I don't think I can watch this anymore.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like she's ever going to win.
Yeah. Well, shows like that, I mean, for me, it's just like, this stopped being fun,
Yeah.
Not that I've watched this show, but
But there's moments where like you think she's gonna escape and finally get away, and then it's like, nope, fuck you. Yeah. You feel shitty for even thinking that was a possibility.
Yeah, that can get tiresome.
Yeah. Next we have Trumpet Cop, who says, I'm going to stretch the concept a little bit and go with Ardelia Lortz from The Library Policeman. Although she isn't explicitly a religious leader, she does use religion as a shield for her parasitic lifestyle. She's a constant churchgoer and a real goody-goody in public. And only the unluckiest of souls get to see her true self. Also, I can make a case for her storylines being the equivalent of a charismatic preacher's sermons. There's no denying the hold she has on her audience. That was a pretty good way of summarizing that role in that short story without really telling you anything about it, Matt. That's a short story that it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever read in my entire life. I'll say that.
All right. It's one of those.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Sounds great.
But that is, I mean, it is interesting. King does this quite a bit, but here is a character who literally, like, I think, to without spoiling it fully, the parasitic lifestyle in Trumpet Cop's sentence here is not metaphorical. It's more literal, and it is interesting the way a person and a character like that will, hide out in the open under the guise of, the goody-goody religious woman. It's very effective for them.
Huh. Interesting. I'll have to read this one someday. Maybe not right now, though. All right. Complicated 9519 says, with all the Stephen King answers, I feel inclined to pick a different route, one more disliked by the host of this podcast.
Oh, no.
You heard it here, right here and now, an anime answer. There are plenty of answers here, but I'll go with the man who is lighting itself Enel from One Piece. I don't know how to say that. Self-proclaimed god of Sky Island, and who was drawn to resemble Eminem. This man believes himself to be a god, along with the power to smite bitches. He can also hear sounds from miles away, striking fear into his followers. I won't go too deep into it, but this dude pretty much just thinks the ground itself is a holy land and wishes to rule it all. Living in the sky where there is a minimal amount, he decides to build an ark of gold powered by his own electricity and fly to the moon to claim all the dirt there and rule over it. Sounds like anime.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I was told that One Piece is a pirate story.
I think at this point, my understanding is that One Piece just contains everything within it. Yeah. I don't know, man.
This is why I can't hang with this shit, man.
Yep.
You read all that and I was just like, nah, I can't do it.
Yep.
Next, we have Like a Fox, who says, others have, rightfully so, in my opinion, answered Mrs. Carmody from The Mist. She is truly terrifying. But to diversify the discussion, I'm going to bring in Immortan Joe from Mad Max Fury Road. Now, I'm no religious scientist, so I can't say whether a cult grows to the level of a religion, but Joe has built up a mythos surrounding himself to gather the large following and to amass resources, and hundreds of people under his control are so brainwashed that they are willing to follow him blindly to a shiny and chrome death. Sounds pretty fanatical to me. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's co-opting any existing popular religious but it is fanatical. Like he builds himself up as a god. That's why he calls himself Immortan. Like he is the immortal Joe. That is the only path towards righteousness.
Yeah. I mean, he just seems to have lazily borrowed from a bunch of different cult and religious ideas.
Yep, he's a jerk.
Which we hate him. He's great.
That actor died recently.
Oh.
It's very sad.
Yeah. Next we have Shenanigoats, who says, a recent example, Bev Keane from Midnight Mass, played to perfection by Samantha Sloyan. Anyone who grew up in a small religious town knows Bev Keane. Super active in the church and always ready with a fake smile, she carries herself with a holier-than-thou attitude and is openly judgmental of anyone who doesn't match her level of heavenly grace. At heart, she's a deeply selfish person who twists her religious beliefs to justify what she does, and she always has a Bible verse at the ready to defend a horrific decision. An infuriating character, but thanks to the superb writing, directing, and acting, she's also very believable.
Yeah. Great answer.
For sure.
Have we talked recently about how much Midnight Mass fucking owns? Because Midnight Mass fucking owns.
Not recently. This is our semi-regular plug that everyone who loves Stephen King should go watch Midnight Mass, which might as well be a Stephen King show.
Yeah, Mike Flanagan is like simpatico with King in just so many different ways. And, the thing I love most about this show, without getting into it too much, it's definitely got the standard Stephen King, look how evil hides amongst religion bent to it. Certainly. That's a big, huge part of what the show is doing. But what I like about it is it's not like broadly ripping down faith and spirituality, right? Like it's more complicated than that. And I think it comes from a person, Flanagan, like King, was raised religious. I think Flanagan was raised Catholic and is now, I believe he's an atheist. So he no longer believes, but his parents are believers and he respects them quite a deal. And so he views the many different facets of faith and spirituality and religion and how those things can be powerful tools to help people deal with the trials and tribulations of life, and also powerful tools to manipulate, destroy, and just rule over people. And that is so Kingian that we have a whole discussion question about it on our Stephen King podcast. So it's Midnight Mass, folks. Real good shit.
Yeah, strong recommend.
Next, we have Dark Beer Rules, who says, I'm going to once again refer to C.S. Lewis here and go with Shift the Ape in the Last Battle, the final book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. For a long time, this was my least favorite book in the series due to Shift's incredibly insidious corruption of the recognition among every Narnian of the ultimate good of Aslan, to where he becomes a scoffed at and hated figure. Basically, this horridly selfish and lazy ape sees a lion skin, not from the lion, as the reader is made aware, floating below a waterfall. He convinces his kind, soft-brained donkey friend Puzzle to wade in and get it at great risk. He does, and Shift, using his evil genius and opposable thumbs, fashions it into a sort of robe, which he fastens upon Puzzle and commences to pass him off as Aslan to the poor creatures of Narnia. It doesn't help matters that the actual Aslan hasn't shown himself for hundreds of years, and the creatures have all grown forgetful of his true nature. So when Shift begins to speak for the false Aslan and does some truly terrible things to the Narnians, enslaving them for his nefarious purposes, they grow cynical and hard-hearted towards each other, and Aslan too. But in the end, the true Aslan along with a Prince of Narnia and some Earth children, are able to confront this usurper and, well, everything ends. But the way it happens is pretty great, and the description of Aslan's country, clearly representing heaven, is truly wondrous.
Yeah, that's funny. I've definitely read that book, but I totally forgot 100% of all that stuff. So
yeah, me too. I don't remember any of it all. I love this, and I love this coming from C.S. Lewis, a man who is very outspoken about his Christianity and his faith. Right? It's core to what the Chronicles of Narnia is, and it makes sense for a religious man to look at the corruption of religion with that much ire, right? Like religious people should hate that stuff more than anyone else, right? Yeah. Because here's this thing I believe in, this thing I believe in with all my heart, that is in my mind a powerful force to do good in this terrible world, and you are taking that thing and twisting it and corrupting it and breaking it in a ways that's disgusting. Like they should be more angry about this than anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I think that's one of the admirable things about C.S. Lewis is he did directly confront and struggle with a lot of these things in his various writings. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Coach Wargo says Robert Mitchum in Night of the Hunter. Reverend Harry Powell is a charming, slick preacher who marries women and then kills them for their money. Mitchum is perfect for the role with his long face, his gravel voice, and the silky tones of a snake oil salesman. His explanation of the tattoos on his knuckles, love and hate, will send a chill up your spine. Ah, little lady, you're staring at my fingers. Would you like me to tell you the story of right hand, left hand? So yeah, this is a movie with a very manipulative character at the core of it. Sounds cool. I've never heard of this actually.
I actually haven't either. If you folks want to, Coach Wargo goes on to kind of explain the kind of the basic plot of the story, which we don't have time to read because gosh, we're running so late. But I kind of want to check it out.
Yeah.
Next, we have Daniel D., who says, I'm going to pass up on all the obvious, heinous King religious zealots and instead point to a batshit crazy comic book and to a lesser extent crazy TV show called Preacher. That comic is all sorts of fucked up. It's about a disenfranchised preacher man with a shady background who gets the power of God in the form of a possession by the offspring of a demon and an angel named Genesis. Matt, did you ever read or watch Preacher?
No, I haven't.
I think I watched the first couple episodes of the show and I found it very interesting. But for whatever reason, I didn't ever go back. And no, I did not read. I did not read the comic because I don't really read comics.
Yeah. I think I remember the trailers though. Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, okay. And it's the type of thing that I think I would enjoy because I really like this kind of examination of religious characters in that way that do weird, fucked up stuff. There's like a character that has a butt face. And I think he's called Buttface.
Fascinating. I did not know that about this. All right. So next we have Jake D, who says, my favorite evil religious figure recently is the prophet from Station 11. Don't want to spoil too much, so this may be too vague, but who his disciples are and what they do is devastating. The best evil religious figures always look on the outside like normal, almost boring, average people. It makes it all the more horrific when you look under the hood. But when you find out the intricacies of how the prophet became who they are and realize they had the potential early on to not choose the dark side, it reminds me of what happens often with king characters. Throw a horrific situation at them and see where they end up. A character becoming evil as a result of bad choices is way more compelling than one who has always been bad.
I agree with that, and I agree with this answer. Station 11, really good TV show on HBO. Recommend it.
A lot of answers this week that I not only haven't seen but haven't even heard of. So
this is based off a book that I've tried multiple times to get people to pick for book club, and that's never happened. So it might just end up having to be an I pick 'em because I really, really, really want to read this book. I think it's right up our alley as far as things we'd like to talk about. So.
Sounds good.
We'll see.
Let's do it.
Next, we have Steve L., who says Luther Brady, head of the Dormentalist Church, was a great evil religious character that repairman Jack faced off against. He was all smiles and charm in front of the camera, but had an evil agenda behind the scenes. Steve, I love your continued campaign to get us to try to read the Repairman Jack series. I promise, read at least the first book of that one day. We tried, Matt, to get that on book club. I think Steve probably submitted it to our book club nominations, and I put it up on the Patreon poll to see if we could get some people to vote for it, and it just didn't happen. But we tried. We tried.
Need to campaign harder, Steve.
Yeah.
All right, and finally from Jennifer D, my favorite evil religious figure is Reverend Paris from The Crucible. The pure evil manipulation of an entire town to the point of mass murder had me at hello. In the 6th grade, our teacher assigned the class to write a speech from the perspective of our favorite character from the play that may sway the townsfolk to our view of the witch trials. Every girl got up and spoke as Abigail, Betty, Elizabeth. Then it was my turn. I gave a fiery sermon as a middle-aged man condemning the witches to burn in a blazing hell, lest they confess their devotion to the Dark Lord. I ate lunch alone, a lot. That's delightful.
That's so good. I love that. That reminds me of all the speeches and stuff we had to do in high school. Do you remember in English class when you would have to just everyone must read a monologue from Romeo and Juliet for some reason, because this has something to do with English.
Yeah, I remember that.
I had to do the balcony scene. I had to do To Be or Not to Be, which I still have memorized. I still have the balcony scene and To Be or Not to Be memorized. And I had to do Friends, Romans, Countrymen from Julius Caesar.
Wow.
I still have that one memorized too.
I didn't have to memorize more than maybe one thing ever. That's a lot of work.
Well,
yeah.
I don't remember if I had to memorize it or if I just did.
Yeah.
But you know what would always happen to me in that?
Huh.
Like, I'm not bad. Obviously, I'm not bad at talking. Pretty good at it, and I'm not bad at like reciting stuff. I'm not a good actor, but like reciting stuff like that, I'm not bad at it. But for some reason, every time I had to get up in front of the class and do something like that, like right before me would be someone in my class that's also like in theater arts and big in theater. So I would come up there with my rehearsed speech prepared, and then like this girl would walk up and just like knock it out of the fucking park, and then I would have to follow that up, and I'm like, well, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
That would always happen to me.
I'm sorry, Scott. I'm sorry you have this burden to bear.
Yeah, and obviously it's still bothering me 20 years later.
Maybe if you just do enough podcasts, then
that's really what this is all about.
You won't hear the screaming of the lambs.
And on that note, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much to everyone who sent in those questions. And sorry again for not doing a better job at kind of putting the guide rails on that question, which we should have, considering the really sensitive topic we just chose to discuss.
Yeah. Next week's discussion question is, what makes a dramatic death sad?
Yeah. So we were really sad at the death of Wolfe. You were really sad at the death of Wolfe. Why?
Yeah.
Why are some deaths not sad?
There's a lot of angles you can go on this. I think this is a good one.
I watched a movie this weekend called The Atom Project, and a character dies in that movie, and I was not sad at all. Because it's a bad movie. But why? You tell us. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us here this week. Next week, Jack continues his time at the Thayer School as we discuss chapters 13 all the way through the end of part 3, A Collision of Worlds. Ooh, that means only one more part after next week, Matt. We're getting close. Slowly marching to the end of this book.
Yeah. We're past the halfway point. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit at r/doof_media is a great place to hang out or answer the discussion question.
Mm-hmm. If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. We are on every single possible podcast platform. Find us there. Hit the subscribe button. Also, hit the share button. Does that work? Follow us on YouTube and hit the up.
Copy
the up
links,
there, the up.
Paste them into things, and then click submit is the main thing.
Is it likes on YouTube or ups?
I think it's likes.
I don't think it's ups on anywhere. I think I just made up a thing.
Yeah, all of that stuff. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. This week we have special thanks for new patrons, Jill K, Lauren R, and Kelly K. Welcome. We hope you go check out the cool bonus features over there, including Other Levels of the Tower, the podcast where we talk about Stephen King adaptations, of which we covered several of the adaptations mentioned in today's discussion questions.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's I don't think The Mist was on Other Levels of the Tower. I think The Mist was a Doofcast episode before we started doing Other Levels of the Tower. But everything else, it's on there.
Sounds right to me.
Of course, if you cannot afford to support us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with everyone, with all the religious nuts in your life. I said we're going to remove the real life examples to be sensitive, and then I just say something like that. So walking fucking contradiction, Scott Daly over here.
That's right.
You can, of course, help us out by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from BF7420000, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great. I started listening during pandemic like lots of folks. Have always been a King fan, but while looking for some good content, stumbled on you guys. You rekindled my love for reading, and I journeyed my second time through the tower along the quartet of Matt, Scott, and the other slingers around the Doofcast multiverse. Having now completed most of King's works, I am currently reading one book and listening to another almost constantly. Hope you guys continue your analysis. Hope you guys continue, period. Your analyses are thoughtful, in-depth, and thought-provoking, and you are fair giving criticism and praise when it's due, in my opinion. Keep it up. Hope I'm on the journey when y'all make it to the stand. And keep up the good work. Well, the stand is coming up here fast, BF, so I hope you're listening to this, and we'll be at the stand in just a few short months somehow already. It's wild.
Awesome. Glad to have you journeying with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was incredibly kind. And thank you to everyone out there who continues to leave those ratings and reviews. The fact that we have a new one, at least one new one to read each week, is just delightful to me. So we really appreciate that. Please keep them coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, folks, we are finally done. Gosh, this was a long one. We just got too wound up in the early parts of the show. We always do this, Matt. The first 2 pages of the script take 20 minutes, and then we're like, shit.
Yeah.
This always happens.
Yep.
But that's going to do it. Long days and pleasant nights.
May you have twice the number.